Welcome, dear listeners, to Mythic Night. Settle into comfort, let the cares of the day drift away, and prepare yourself for a journey into the ancient world. A world of gods and monsters, of beauty and horror, of injustice and tragedy. Tonight, we tell the story of Medusa. You know her name. You've seen her face, that terrible visage with serpents writhing where hair should be, eyes that turn living flesh to cold stone. She has become the very image of the monstrous, her face a symbol of terror for thousands of years. But Medusa was not always a monster. Once she was simply a young woman whose beauty was spoken of in whispers, whose future seemed bright with promise. This is a story about transformation, but not the kind found in fairy tales. This is a darker transformation, one born not of evil deeds but of cruel circumstance, of catching the attention of those far more powerful than herself. In ancient Greece, mortals lived always in the shadow of divine attention. To be noticed by a god could mean glory, or it could mean destruction. Men and women prayed not only for blessings, but simply to be overlooked, to live their lives in peaceful obscurity, away from the dangerous whims of immortal beings. Medusa did not have that luxury. Her story begins in beauty and ends in blood. Every monster has a story. Every creature of nightmare was once something else. And if we listen carefully, we might find that the true monsters are not always the ones we expect. So let us begin at the beginning, before the snakes, before the stone, before the cave at the edge of the world. Let us begin when Medusa was still human, still hopeful, still innocent of what was to come. Let us begin with the maiden. In the golden age of Athens, when the Parthenon gleamed white upon the Acropolis and the goddess Athena watched over her beloved city, there lived a young woman named Medusa. She was mortal, fully, completely mortal, born of mortal parents in a world where immortality was the province of gods alone. Her father, Phorcys, was a sea god of the old order, ancient and primordial. Her mother, Ceto, was a goddess of the ocean's dangers. But Medusa herself, unlike her two sisters, Theno and Euryale, who were born immortal, had been granted or perhaps cursed with mortality. She would age. She would die. She was vulnerable in ways her sisters were not. But in her youth, mortality seemed a distant concern. For Medusa possessed something her immortal sisters did not, a beauty so extraordinary, so luminous that it seemed touched by the divine itself. Imagine her, if you will, walking through the marble-columned streets of Athens. Her hair, her hair was her greatest glory. It fell in cascading waves down her back, catching the Mediterranean sunlight like spun gold, or perhaps deep chestnut with threads of amber running through it. The poets of the time struggled to describe it adequately. Some said it was the color of honey in afternoon light. Others claimed it held all the warmth of sunset itself. Her eyes were said to be remarkably beautiful, bright, intelligent, full of life and curiosity. Some accounts say they were green like the Aegean Sea, others that they were deep brown like rich earth. Whatever their color, they were eyes that drew attention, that held the gaze, that seemed to see into the soul of whoever looked upon her. Her face was perfectly symmetrical, with high cheekbones and smooth skin that seemed to glow with an inner radiance. Her figure was graceful, her movements elegant. When she walked, people paused in their daily business to watch her pass, but Medusa was not vain. She did not seek attention or glory for her appearance. In fact, she found the constant scrutiny uncomfortable, even troubling. Men would stop their conversations to stare. Women would whisper as she passed, some in admiration, others in envy. Merchants would offer her their finest wares for free, hoping merely for her smile in return. It was exhausting, being so seen, so observed, so desired. And so, when she came of age, Medusa made a choice that seemed wise and pious, a choice that should have protected her. She dedicated herself to Athena. The temple of Athena Parthenos, Athena the Virgin, stood proud and magnificent on the Acropolis, the highest point in Athens. It was a place of pristine marble, of soaring columns, of sacred rituals and ancient traditions. The goddess Athena, born fully formed from Zeus's head, was herself a virgin goddess, one who had never known the touch of any man or god, who prided herself on her wisdom, her strategic mind, her fierce independence. To serve in Athena's temple was a great honor. The priestesses who tended the sacred flame, who performed the daily rituals, who maintained the sanctity of the space, were held in the highest esteem. They were protectors of civilization itself, servants of the goddess who had given Athens the olive tree, who had taught mankind weaving and pottery, who guided heroes and kings with her wisdom. But service to Athena came with strict requirements. A priestess must be pure, not just in action but in thought and spirit. She must remain chaste, untouched, devoted entirely to the goddess. To break this vow was to invite the most severe punishment imaginable. Medusa understood this. She accepted it willingly, even gratefully. In the temple she found peace. The sacred space was cool and quiet, a refuge from the chaotic attention of the outside world. Here she could walk without being stared at, or rather, she could be stared at only by the great statue of Athena herself, towering and serene, watching over her devotees with those painted eyes. Medusa's days took on a gentle rhythm, a pattern that brought her comfort and purpose. She would rise before dawn, when the world was still dark and the stars still bright overhead. The air would be cool, carrying the scent of night-blooming jasmine from the temple gardens. She would wash in the sacred spring, purifying herself for the day's duties, the cold water shocking her fully awake. Then, as the first light of dawn began to paint the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold, she would help light the sacred flame that burned always in Athena's honor. The fire must never go out. It represented the eternal vigilance of the goddess, her constant protection over Athens and all who dwelled there. Throughout the day, there were offerings to receive. Citizens would climb the steep path to the Acropolis, bearing gifts for the goddess: olive oil pressed from the first fruits of the harvest, wine in amphorae decorated with scenes of Athena's triumphs, honey cakes sweetened with wild bees' honey, woven cloth dyed in precious purple, even animals for sacrifice on the great altar outside the temple. Medusa would greet them with quiet dignity, accepting their offerings, speaking the proper prayers, ensuring that each gift was recorded and properly dedicated. She learned to read the faces of those who came, some desperate for divine intervention, others grateful for blessings received, still others simply performing their civic duty with rote efficiency. She swept the marble floors until they gleamed. She polished the bronze implements used in sacred rituals. She arranged fresh flowers before the statue of Athena, roses, lilies, violets, whatever was in season. She helped prepare the ritual meals, grinding grain into flour, kneading bread, mixing the libations of wine and water that would be poured out in offering, and she studied. Oh, how she studied! The priestesses of Athena were not merely servants, they were scholars entrusted with preserving knowledge and wisdom. Medusa learned to read the ancient texts, to understand the hymns and prayers that had been passed down through generations. She learned the stories of heroes and gods, of monsters and miracles, of the great deeds that had shaped the world. She learned history, how Athens had come to be, how Athena had defeated Poseidon in their contest for patronage of the city, offering the olive tree while he had offered only a spring of salt water. She learned philosophy, ethics, the principles of justice and wisdom that Athena embodied. In the evenings, when the day's duties were complete, Medusa would sometimes stand at the edge of the Acropolis and look out over Athens. From this height, she could see the entire city spread before her. The agora where citizens gathered to debate and trade. The theater where great dramas were performed. The homes clustering around winding streets and beyond them. The countryside with its olive groves and vineyards. And further still, the sea glittering in the fading light. It was beautiful. It was peaceful. It was everything she had hoped for. She had found her calling, her purpose. She was protected here, safe within the goddess's sacred space. Her beauty, which had once been such a burden, was now dedicated to divine service. She wore the simple robes of a priestess, modest, concealing, appropriate. She covered her glorious hair with a veil when she went out in public. She kept her eyes downcast, avoiding the gazes of men. She was, she thought, finally safe from unwanted attention. The other priestesses became her sisters, her companions. They shared the work and the quiet joys of temple life. They would whisper together in the evenings, sharing stories and dreams. laughing softly so as not to disturb the sacred silence. There was Callisto, older and wiser, who had served Athena for 20 years and knew every ritual by heart. There was young Thalia, just beginning her service, still wide-eyed with wonder at the honor of her position. There was Irene, whose voice was so beautiful that when she sang the hymns to Athena, even the birds seemed to fall silent to listen. They were a community, bound together by their devotion, by their shared purpose. They looked after one another, taught one another, supported one another through the challenges of their demanding service. Medusa felt, perhaps for the first time in her life, that she truly belonged somewhere. She would serve Athena faithfully, she promised herself. She would honor her vows. She would live a life of purity and devotion, of wisdom and grace. She would grow old in this service, her beauty fading naturally with time until she was simply another aged priestess, respected for her knowledge and her years of faithful duty. It seemed a good life, a worthy life, a safe life. She did not know, how could she know, that the gods do not always respect the sanctuaries they themselves have established. She did not know that vows and prayers and piety are sometimes no protection at all against divine desire. She did not know that even in the temple of the virgin goddess, she was not safe. She did not know that her beauty, which she had tried so hard to hide, to consecrate, to neutralize, had already been noticed by another god, one whose desire, once kindled, could not be denied. The sea remembers everything, and Poseidon, lord of the oceans, god of earthquakes and storms, had seen Medusa, and having seen her, he wanted her. Poseidon was ancient, one of the three brothers who had overthrown the Titans and divided the cosmos among themselves. Zeus claimed the sky, Hades the underworld, and Poseidon the vast endless seas. He was power incarnate, tempestuous and proud, as changeable as the waters he ruled. The Greeks both worshipped and feared him. Sailors made offerings before every voyage, praying that the Earthshaker would grant them calm seas and favorable winds. Coastal cities built elaborate temples in his honor, knowing that with a strike of his trident, he could send earthquakes to topple their walls or tsunamis to drown their harbors. Poseidon was not known for his restraint. Like many of the Olympian gods, he took what he wanted, when he wanted it. The myths are filled with his conquests, his pursuits, his transformations into bulls and stallions and dolphins to claim the objects of his desire, and he had never forgiven Athens for choosing Athena over him. The contest had been simple enough. Both gods had wanted to be the patron of the great city on the hill. The citizens had gathered to watch as each deity offered a gift. Poseidon had struck the ground with his mighty trident, and a spring had burst forth. But the water was salt water, useful for nothing, a reminder of the sea's power, but offering no practical benefit to the people. Then Athena had planted her spear in the ground, and from that spot had grown an olive tree, the first of its kind. It would provide food, oil for lamps and cooking, wood for building, leaves for healing. It was the perfect gift, practical and generous. The people had chosen Athena, and Poseidon had never forgotten the slight. He watched Athens from his palace beneath the waves, watched it grow and prosper under Athena's protection, watched as temples rose in her honor, while his own shrines received less devotion, less glory. The resentment festered like a wound that would not heal. And then one day he saw Medusa. Perhaps he caught a glimpse of her as she walked in procession during one of Athena's festivals. Perhaps he saw her at the coast when the priestesses went to collect water from a sacred spring that fed into the sea. Perhaps he simply heard the whispers of her beauty and came to see for himself, as gods often did when rumors of mortal loveliness reached their ears. However it happened, he saw her. And seeing her, he wanted her with the kind of absolute desire that gods feel, uncomplicated by morality, unrestrained by conscience, burning with the certainty that what they want, they should have. But there was an added element to his desire, a darker motivation beyond simple lust. She was Athena's priestess. She served in Athena's temple. She had dedicated herself to the virgin goddess who had humiliated him before all of Athens. What better revenge than to take what belonged to Athena? What sweeter victory than to violate the sanctity of her most sacred space? The thought once formed consumed him. He began to watch Medusa, to follow her movements, to learn her patterns. When she went to draw water from the springs, he was there in the depths watching. When she stood at the edge of the Acropolis looking out to sea, he saw her, small and vulnerable against the vast sky. He could be patient when he chose to be. The sea is nothing if not patient. It wears down mountains given enough time. But Poseidon's patience was not infinite, and it was not kind. He was merely waiting for the right moment. That moment came on an ordinary day, a day that began like any other. Medusa had risen before dawn as always, had performed her morning ablutions, had lit the sacred flame. The day was warm, the sky a perfect azure blue, the kind of day when the gods seemed distant and benevolent, when the world felt safe and ordered. In the afternoon, when the heat was at its peak and the other priestesses were resting in the shade, Medusa remained in the temple. There was work to be done, offerings to catalogue, floors to sweep, prayers to be said. She preferred to work alone sometimes, to have the great space to herself, to move through the cool marble halls in peaceful solitude. The temple was empty. The great statue of Athena gazed down with painted eyes, serene and distant. Outside, the city dozed in the afternoon heat. Even the ever-present sounds of Athens, merchants calling their wares, children playing, the bustle of daily life seemed muted. Far away, Medusa was arranging flowers before Athena's statue, her back to the entrance, humming softly to herself. The scent of roses and lilies filled the air, sweet and clean. She did not hear him enter. The gods can move in absolute silence when they wish. They can make themselves invisible, or visible only when they choose. They can be as insubstantial as mist or as solid as the earth itself. Poseidon entered Athena's temple, not as a god, but as a man, tall, powerfully built, with sea-green eyes and hair the color of storm clouds. He looked like any wealthy visitor who might come to make an offering, though something in his bearing suggested power, command, danger. Medusa, still focused on arranging the flowers just so, finally sensed a presence behind her. She turned, expecting to see one of her sister priestesses, or perhaps a late worshipper come to make an offering. Instead, she saw him. Something in his gaze made her blood run cold. She had seen desire before, what beautiful woman had not? But this was different. This was not the awkward longing of young men, or the appreciative glances of respectful admirers. This was the look of someone who saw not a person, but a possession, not a priestess, but prey. "My lord," she said carefully, her voice steady despite the sudden fear that gripped her. "The temple is closed for private devotions. If you wish to make an offering, please return." "I know who you are," he said, his voice like waves crashing against rocks. "Medusa. They say you are the most beautiful mortal in all of Greece." She took a step back. "I am a priestess of Athena. I am sworn to the goddess and to a life of purity. You should not be here." He smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "Should not? I am Poseidon, Earthshaker, lord of all the seas. I go where I wish." Terror flooded through her then, cold and absolute. A god. Not just any god, but one of the great three. One of the most powerful beings in all of creation. And he was looking at her with unmistakable intent. "Please," she whispered. "This is Athena's sacred temple. You must not." "Athena," he said, and his voice was bitter with old anger. "Always Athena. This city should have been mine. Its people should worship me, not her. But they chose her and her cursed olive tree." He moved closer. Medusa backed away, her mind racing frantically for escape, for help, for any way out of what was about to happen. "Please," she said again, more desperately now. "I am sworn to her. I have vowed chastity. If you do this, you will defile her temple, break her sacred laws." "Yes," he said simply. "I will." And in that moment, Medusa understood that this was not merely about desire. This was about revenge, about power, about a god settling an ancient score. She was not really the object of his attention at all. She was merely the weapon he would use to strike at Athena, the means by which he would violate everything the goddess held sacred. She ran, not toward the entrance, he was blocking that path, but deeper into the temple, toward the inner sanctuary, where only the highest priestesses were permitted to go, where the most sacred relics were kept, where surely Athena's power would be strongest, where the goddess would protect her devoted servant. She could hear his footsteps behind her, unhurried. He was not concerned. Where could she go that he could not follow? What door could she bar that he could not break? What sanctuary could she claim that he would respect? The inner chamber was small, intimate, lit only by the eternal flame that burned in a golden brazier. The walls were painted with scenes of Athena's triumphs, her birth from Zeus's head, her gift of the olive tree, her guidance of heroes. Here the presence of the goddess felt almost tangible, as if she might step down from the painted walls at any moment. "Goddess," Medusa cried out, falling to her knees before the flame. "Athena, protector, guardian, please help me. I am your servant, your devoted priestess. Do not let this happen. Do not let your temple be defiled." But the goddess did not answer. The painted eyes on the wall stared down, beautiful and blank and silent. Poseidon entered the inner sanctuary without hesitation, without any sign that he felt the sacred power of the space. Gods do not fear other gods' domains, they simply do not care. "Even here she does not come to save you," he said. "Perhaps she does not care as much about her servants as you believe. Or perhaps she simply knows better than to stand against me." What happened next? The ancient texts speak of it with delicate euphemism, or sometimes with brutal honesty. But always they make one thing clear. Medusa did not consent. She fought. She struggled. She begged. She prayed. It did not matter. On the floor of Athena's innermost sanctuary, in the sacred heart of the virgin goddess's temple, Poseidon took what he wanted. The eternal flame flickered as if in distress. The painted images of Athena on the walls witnessed everything, silent and still. Medusa wept. She called for help that did not come. She invoked every name of the goddess: Athena Parthenos, Athena Polius, Athena Promachus. But no divine intervention came, no thunderbolt from Zeus, no miraculous rescue. The gods are not always just. The gods are not always merciful. Sometimes, the gods simply do not care about the suffering of mortals, even mortals who have dedicated their entire lives to divine service. When it was over, Poseidon stood. He looked down at Medusa, crumpled and weeping on the floor of the sanctuary, and his expression was not regret or guilt, but satisfaction. He had accomplished what he came for, not just the violation of a beautiful woman, but the desecration of Athena's most holy place, the ultimate insult to the goddess who had rejected him. "Remember," he said softly, "that I was here, that I did this, that in her own temple Athena could not or would not protect you." And then he was gone, vanishing as suddenly as he had appeared, leaving behind only the scent of salt water and seaweed, and a young woman whose life had just been shattered beyond all repair. Medusa lay on the cold marble floor of the inner sanctuary, her priestess robes torn, her carefully arranged hair disheveled, her body aching with pain and violation. She could not move, could not think, could barely breathe. Above her, the eternal flame continued to burn, casting dancing shadows on the walls, where Athena's painted face watched with those beautiful, empty eyes. The goddess had not saved her, had not even answered her prayers, had not struck down the god who violated her temple and her priestess. Why? Why had Athena abandoned her most devoted servant in her moment of greatest need? Medusa would learn the answer soon enough, and the answer would be worse than anything she could have imagined. Time passed strangely in the hours after Poseidon's violation. Medusa could not say how long she lay on the cold marble floor of the inner sanctuary. The eternal flame continued to burn, indifferent to her suffering. The painted eyes of Athena continued to stare down, witnessing everything and nothing. Eventually, she found the strength to move. Her body screamed in protest. Bruises were already forming, dark marks on pale skin, evidence of what had been done to her. Her torn robes hung awkwardly, no longer the pristine garments of a devoted priestess, but tattered reminders of violence. She tried to stand and found her legs would not support her. She crawled instead, inch by painful inch toward the basin of sacred water, kept in the sanctuary for ritual purification. With shaking hands, she tried to wash herself, to cleanse away the touch of the sea god, to somehow make herself pure again. But water, no matter how sacred, cannot wash away trauma, cannot restore what has been taken, cannot undo what has been done. She wept as she washed, great heaving sobs that echoed in the small chamber. She had done nothing wrong. She had followed every rule, kept every vow, served faithfully and with devotion. And still this had happened. Still, she had been violated in the very heart of her goddess's temple. Why? She whispered to the painted images on the walls. Why did you not protect me? I am yours. I have always been yours. Why did you let this happen? The images did not answer. But Medusa felt in that moment a change in the air, a presence vast and powerful, filling the small sanctuary. The temperature dropped suddenly. The eternal flame flickered and bent. Though there was no wind, Athena had arrived. But she did not come as a savior. She did not come with comfort or compassion. She did not come to destroy Poseidon for his crime, or to heal her wounded priestess. She came in fury. The goddess materialized not in her aspect as wise protector or patient teacher, but as Athena Promachos, Athena the warrior, terrible and wrathful. Her eyes, usually so calm and thoughtful, blazed with divine rage. Her armor gleamed like polished silver, and in her hand she held her spear, its point sharp enough to pierce the very fabric of reality. Medusa, still kneeling by the basin, looked up at her goddess with desperate hope. Surely now that Athena was here, justice would be done. Surely the goddess would comfort her, would punish Poseidon, would set right this terrible wrong. Goddess, Medusa whispered, her voice breaking. He, Poseidon, he forced his way in, silence! The word crashed through the sanctuary like thunder. The eternal flame guttered and nearly went out. Medusa flinched back, confusion and fear warring in her chest. My temple, Athena said, her voice shaking with rage. My sacred temple, defiled, desecrated, made impure by carnal acts within these holy walls. I did not, Medusa began, but Athena's gaze fell upon her like a physical blow, and the words died in her throat. You allowed a god into this place. You permitted the violation of my sanctuary. I did not permit anything. The words burst from Medusa in a desperate cry. I fought him. I begged him to stop. I prayed to you, called your name, pleaded for your help. I did not want this. I have kept my vows. I have remained pure in thought and deed. Pure? Athena's laugh was cold, bitter, utterly without humor. You lie here in my inner sanctuary, reeking of seawater and sex, your robes torn, your body marked by another god's touch, and you dare speak to me of purity? The injustice of it struck Medusa like a physical blow. She stared at her goddess, the divine being she had devoted her life to serving, and saw no mercy there, no understanding, no compassion at all. He is a god, Medusa whispered. What could I have done against a god? I am only mortal. I am weak, powerless. I could not stop him. You could have died rather than submit. The words fell into the sanctuary like stones into still water, each one rippling outward with terrible implications. You could have thrown yourself on a blade. You could have dashed your head against these marble walls. You could have chosen death over defilement. But you did not. You lived. You allowed this violation to occur. I did not allow anything. Medusa's voice rose, desperation giving way to a kind of wild anger. I was raped, violated, brutalized by a god who used me to strike at you, to insult you, to defile your temple. And you were not here. You did not come when I called. You did not protect me. Where were you? Where were you when I needed you? The sanctuary fell utterly silent. Even the flames seemed to freeze mid-flicker. No mortal spoke to a god this way. No priestess challenged her goddess thus. Athena's eyes narrowed, and in them Medusa saw something that chilled her to the bone. Not anger now, but calculation. The goddess was thinking, considering, weighing options with that famous wisdom for which she was renowned. But wisdom and justice, Medusa was learning, were not the same thing. Not at all. You ask where I was, Athena said softly, and somehow her quiet voice was more terrifying than her earlier rage. I was exactly where I've always been, in Olympus among my fellow gods. And you ask why I did not come to stop Poseidon? She stepped closer, looming over the kneeling priestess. Poseidon is one of the three great powers of the cosmos. He is my uncle, ancient and mighty. The balance of power among the gods is delicate, mortal girl. We do not simply attack one another over the fate of a single human, no matter how devoted. The consequences would be catastrophic. Wars have been fought among the gods for less, and so I was expendable, Medusa said, her voice hollow. My suffering, my violation, my vows, all of it means nothing compared to the politics of Olympus. You are mortal, Athena said, as if that explained everything. Perhaps it did. Mortals suffer. It is their nature. They live briefly, painfully, and then they die. This is the order of things. Then why ask us to serve you at all? The question came out as barely more than a whisper. Why accept our devotion, our prayers, our sacrifices, if we mean so little to you? For a moment, something flickered across Athena's face. Something that might have been regret or shame or simply annoyance at being questioned. But it passed quickly, replaced by cold determination. My temple has been defiled, the goddess said. That defilement must be cleansed. The purity of this sacred space must be restored. Hope flickered in Medusa's chest. Yes, we can perform the rituals of purification, make offerings, cleanse the sanctuary with sacred water and prayers. I will help. You are the defilement. The words were quiet, matter-of-fact, and more devastating than any scream could have been. No matter that you did not consent. No matter that you were forced. The fact remains that within these walls, the vows of chastity were broken. Your body, which was consecrated to me, has been claimed by another god. You are no longer pure. You can no longer serve in my temple. But I did nothing wrong. Medusa was weeping now, tears streaming down her face. How can you punish me for being attacked? How is this justice? This is not about justice, Athena said. This is about sanctity. This is about maintaining the sacred boundaries that separate the pure from the profane. You have been made profane, Medusa. Through no fault of your own, perhaps, but profane nonetheless. Then cast me out, Medusa said desperately. Exile me from your service. Banish me from Athens, but please do not. But she could see in Athena's eyes that exile would not be sufficient. The goddess was considering something else, something far worse. That famous wisdom was at work, solving a problem, addressing multiple grievances with one solution. Athena could not punish Poseidon. He was too powerful, too politically important. To strike at him would be to risk open conflict among the Olympians, possibly even another Titanomachy, a war that could shatter the heavens and the earth. But she could not allow the violation of her temple to go unanswered either. Her honor demanded response. Her pride required retribution. And there was Medusa, convenient and vulnerable, mortal and powerless. Poseidon desired you for your beauty, Athena said thoughtfully. That beauty drew his eye, kindled his lust, led him to defile my temple. Very well. Let that beauty be transformed into something else. Let it become a weapon, a curse, a horror. No, Medusa breathed. No, please. You asked me where I was when you needed me. I was absent. I failed to protect you. Athena's voice was colder now, harder. But I will not fail again. From this moment forward, you will never need my protection from unwanted male attention. No man will ever desire you again. No god will ever pursue you. Goddess, please, I beg you, I will ensure that anyone who looks upon you with desire will be filled not with lust, but with terror. I will make you so hideous, so monstrous, that none will dare approach you. Consider it a gift. The word gift dripped with bitter irony. A gift? Medusa's voice broke on the word. You call this a gift? You wanted protection. I am giving it to you. You will be safe from all violation, Medusa. Eternally safe, because you will be untouchable. Athena raised her hand and divine power gathered around it like storm clouds, crackling with energy. Medusa tried to run but found herself frozen, unable to move, held in place by the goddess's will. No, she screamed. No, please, not this. Punish me if you must, kill me if you will, but do not. The power struck her like lightning. Pain, incredible, searing, all-consuming pain, exploded through every nerve in Medusa's body. She screamed, a sound of pure agony that echoed through the sanctuary. and out across the sleeping city beyond. Her scalp burned as if on fire. She reached up with hands that were changing, nails lengthening into claws, skin taking on a strange greenish hue, and felt her beautiful hair, her glory, writhing beneath her fingers. Not hair. Not anymore. Serpents. Her hair was transforming into serpents. She could feel each one as it formed, growing from her scalp like horrible new nerves. They hissed and coiled, venomous and alive, a crown of vipers where once had been cascading waves of human hair. She could feel what they felt, sense what they sensed. It was nauseating, overwhelming, wrong in every possible way. Her face was changing too. She could feel her features distorting, her beautiful symmetry warping into something else. Her jaw extended, her teeth lengthened into fangs. Her tongue, gods, her tongue was forking like a snake's. Her skin turned scaly in places, rough and reptilian. Her hands became claws, deadly and inhuman. Her body remained recognizably humanoid, but was twisted, corrupted, made monstrous. But the worst transformation was happening to her eyes. Those eyes that had been so admired, so praised. Power flooded into them, terrible divine power. A curse so profound that it altered the very nature of reality around her. Her vision changed, became sharper but also stranger, as if she could see not just the surface of things, but something deeper, something essential, and she understood with horrible clarity what Athena had done. Anyone who met her gaze, truly met it, eye to eye, would be transformed instantly into stone. Not dead, not precisely, but frozen forever in the moment of looking, trapped in stone as living statues, aware but unable to move, unable to scream, unable to do anything but exist in eternal paralyzed horror. It was a death worse than death. It was a curse that would make her a killer simply by being looked at. No, she wept, her voice distorted now, inhuman. No, please take it back, undo this. I cannot. But Athena was already turning away, her task complete, her temple's honor satisfied. You are no longer welcome in Athens, the goddess said without looking back. You are no longer my priestess. You are no longer even truly mortal. You are other now, monster, Gorgon, Medusa. She spoke the name like a curse in itself. Go to the ends of the earth, creature. Hide yourself away where none will find you. And know that this, all of this, came about because you were beautiful. Because a god desired you. Because you existed in the wrong place at the wrong time. This is not justice, Medusa cried out, her voice barely recognizable. This is cruelty. This is wisdom, Athena interrupted coldly. I have solved multiple problems with one action. My temple's defilement is cleansed. Poseidon's violation is answered. He will never desire you again, I assure you. And you are protected as you wished, from all future assault. All of Olympus will see my wisdom in this solution. The goddess paused at the entrance to the inner sanctuary, looking back one final time. I would say I am sorry for what Poseidon did to you. But gods do not apologize to mortals. That too is wisdom. Recognizing the proper order of things, the hierarchy that keeps the cosmos in balance. You were hurt, yes, but the temple's sanctity matters more than one mortal's suffering. That is simply the truth of the world we inhabit. And with that, Athena vanished, leaving behind only a faint scent of olives and the lingering aura of divine power. Medusa collapsed, her transformed body barely able to support itself. The serpents on her head hissed and writhed in distress that mirrored her own. She crawled toward the basin of sacred water, desperate to see what she had become, but afraid, so terribly afraid of what she would find. The water's surface showed her reflection in the flickering light of the eternal flame. The face that looked back was no longer her own. It was a nightmare made flesh, distorted, monstrous, with serpents framing features that were almost human but fundamentally wrong. Her eyes, gods, her eyes glowed with an unnatural light, deadly and divine. She was hideous. She was terrifying. She was everything beautiful transformed into its opposite, and she understood. With a grief so profound, it threatened to shatter what remained of her sanity. That Athena had been right about one thing. No one would ever desire her again. No one would ever love her. No one would ever look at her with anything but horror and fear. She had wanted to be safe from unwanted attention, and now she was. She was the safest woman in all of Greece, because she was no longer really a woman at all. She was a monster, a warning, a cautionary tale. She was Medusa the Gorgon, and as the reality of her new existence crashed over her, she threw back her head and screamed, a sound of anguish and rage and grief that seemed to go on forever, echoing through the empty temple, unheard by the city sleeping peacefully below. The eternal flame flickered once, then burned steady and bright, indifferent to her suffering, as the gods had always been. Medusa fled Athens before dawn. She could not remain in the temple, that much was clear. The place that had been her sanctuary, her home, her entire world, was now forbidden to her. She was profane, monstrous, cast out from everything she had known. She wrapped herself in a dark cloak, pulling the hood low to hide the serpents that writhed and hissed upon her head. She kept her gaze fixed firmly on the ground, terrified of what would happen if she accidentally met someone's eyes. The city was still dark, the streets empty in that quiet hour before sunrise when even the earliest risers are still asleep. She moved through the shadows like a ghost, leaving behind the Acropolis, the temple, the life she had known. As she passed through the city gates, one of the night watchmen called out to her, "You there, identify yourself." Without thinking, driven by old habits of politeness, Medusa looked up to answer him. Their eyes met. For one frozen moment she saw his face, a middle-aged man, weathered and tired, simply doing his job. She saw the exact instant when his expression changed from mild curiosity to absolute horror. His mouth opened as if to scream, and then he was stone, grey granite where living flesh had been. His face locked forever in that expression of terror, his hand still raised as if to stop her. A statue where a man had stood, so perfectly preserved that she could see the individual, hairs of his beard, the tiny wrinkles around his eyes, the texture of his cloak. But he was not dead, not entirely. She could sense it somehow, could feel it through the curse that now lived in her eyes. He was still aware, still conscious, still screaming inside a body that could no longer move, could no longer breathe, could never again be warm or alive. She had done this. With a single glance, she had condemned a man to a fate worse than death. Medusa ran. She ran blindly, her eyes squeezed shut, stumbling through the darkness with her arms outstretched like a blind woman. She fell repeatedly, scraped her knees and hands on rocks, but she kept running, driven by horror and guilt and the desperate need to get far away from anyone she might hurt. The serpents on her head hissed and coiled, sensing her distress, their venom dripping down to sting her shoulders. They were part of her now, extensions of her own consciousness, and their agitation mirrored her own panic. She ran until exhaustion finally overtook her, until her legs could no longer carry her, and she collapsed in a rocky field far from the city. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, colors that seemed obscene in their beauty when set against her horror. For a long time, she simply lay there, her face pressed against the earth, weeping. The serpents on her head had calmed somewhat, their hissing reduced to occasional agitated flickers. She could feel them moving, coiling and uncoiling, a constant reminder of what she had become. When the tears finally stopped, when she had no more left to give, she sat up slowly. She kept her eyes closed, afraid to look at anything, anyone, even the world around her. But she could not walk through life with her eyes closed forever. Slowly, carefully, she opened them. The rocky field around her was empty. No people, no animals, nothing living. That, at least, was a mercy. She looked down at her hands. They were no longer the soft, pale hands of a priestess. The skin had taken on a greenish-gray tinge like tarnished bronze. Her fingernails had grown into claws, dark and sharp. When she touched her face, she felt scales along her jaw, rough patches where smooth skin had been, and the serpents, gods, the serpents. She reached up tentatively and felt them writhing beneath her fingers. They were not separate creatures, she realized. They were her, extensions of her own body, rooted in her scalp like hair, but alive, conscious, responding to her emotions. When she was afraid, they coiled tight and defensive. When she was angry, they raised themselves up, fangs bared, ready to strike. They were a physical manifestation of her inner state, impossible to hide or control completely. She was a monster. Athena had made sure of that. But what did a monster do? Where did a monster go? For days, Medusa wandered aimlessly through the wilderness, avoiding all human contact. She traveled by night when possible, sleeping during the day in caves or beneath rocky overhangs. She drank from streams, ate berries and roots when she could find them, growing thinner and more desperate. The land itself seemed to reject her. Animals fled at her approach, birds took flight, deer bolted, even insects seemed to scurry away from her presence. She was an abomination, unnatural, something that did not belong in the ordered world. Sometimes in her dreams, she was human again. She was back in Athena's temple, arranging flowers, singing hymns, living her simple, peaceful life. And then, she would wake to find serpents coiling around her face, and the grief would strike her anew. She considered ending it, finding a cliff and throwing herself off, or a blade to draw across her throat. Death would be a mercy, a release from this nightmare existence. But she found she could not do it. Some stubborn part of her, some core of herself that remained despite everything, refused to give Athena that satisfaction. The goddess had taken everything from her, her beauty, her humanity, her future. She would not also take her life. If Medusa was to be a monster, then she would live as a monster. She would survive. As weeks turned to months, she learned to adapt to her new existence. She learned to sense living things around her, even without looking directly at them. The serpents on her head seemed to have some awareness of nearby warmth, nearby movement. She learned to keep her gaze carefully controlled, to look at the ground or at inanimate objects, never at living eyes. She traveled westward, always westward, toward the edges of the known world, away from cities, away from civilization, away from the humans who would see her as an abomination to be destroyed. And eventually, after months of wandering, she came to a desolate place at the very edge of the world, a rocky coastline where the sea crashed against black cliffs, where no trees grew and no towns existed for miles in any direction. There, in a cave carved into the cliff face by countless centuries of wind and waves, she found what might pass for a home. But she was not alone. She discovered this on her first night in the cave, when she woke from an uneasy sleep to find two figures standing at the entrance, silhouetted against the moonlight. Terror gripped her. Travelers, warriors, had she been found already? But then one of them spoke, and the voice was strange, layered, multiplied, as if several people spoke at once. "Sister." Medusa scrambled backward, the serpents on her head rising in alarm. "Who are you? Stay back, don't look at me." "We are already looking," the second figure said, and her voice too was that strange, multiplied sound. "And we do not fear your gaze, for we are already what you have become." They stepped into the cave, and moonlight fell upon their faces. They were Gorgons. Like her, their hair was a mass of living serpents. Like her, their skin had taken on that strange, inhuman quality. Like her, their faces were distorted, monstrous, beautiful in a terrible way. But unlike her, they seemed comfortable in their monstrous forms. They moved with confidence, with grace even. "I am Stheno," said the first, her voice strong and clear despite its multiplicity. "And I am Euryale," said the second, her tone gentler. Medusa stared at them in confusion and dawning recognition. "Stheno, Euryale. But those are my sisters' names. My mortal sisters, but they died years ago when I was still a child. We did not die," Stheno said. "We were transformed. Long before you, little sister. We too were beautiful once. We too caught the attention of gods. We too were punished for our beauty by Athena's curse. You're my sisters?" Medusa's voice broke. "All this time you were alive?" Hercules moved closer, carefully as one might approach a frightened animal. "We have been searching for you. We heard rumors of a new Gorgon, a priestess transformed and cast out. We knew it must be you. We knew that Athena's curse had finally fallen upon our youngest sister. But why? Medusa whispered. Why would she do this to all of us? What did we do to deserve this? We were beautiful, Stheno said bitterly. That is our crime. That has always been our crime. Athena cannot abide beauty that rivals her own, cannot tolerate women who draw too much attention, who make men forget to worship the goddess in their worship of mortal loveliness. We have lived as Gorgons for many years, Euryalus said, sitting down near Medusa but not too close, respecting her need for space. We have learned to survive, even to find some measure of peace in our exile, and we have been waiting for you, waiting for me to be cursed. You could have warned me. You could have... We tried, Euryalus said sadly. We sent messages, tried to reach you through dreams and signs. But Athena's priestesses are taught to ignore such things as delusions or demons. We could not break through her walls to reach you. Medusa felt fresh tears on her cheeks, though whether her transformed body even produced normal tears anymore she could not say. These seemed thicker, almost like venom. I killed a man, she whispered. The night I fled Athens. A guardsman. He looked at me and I turned him to stone without meaning to. He's still there, frozen, aware, suffering. That is the nature of the curse, Stheno said, her voice not unkind but pragmatic. You will kill many more before the end. It is inevitable. Anyone who looks upon your face will become stone. That is Athena's gift to you. Protection through horror. It's not protection, Medusa said bitterly. It's isolation. It's ensuring that I can never again have any connection to another living being. You have us, Euryalus said gently. We are Gorgons. We cannot be turned to stone. We are already cursed, already transformed. We can look upon each other without fear. But unlike you, Stheno added, Euryalus and I were made immortal. We cannot die, cannot age, cannot be killed by any mortal weapon. We will live forever in these forms. And I, Medusa asked, though part of her already knew the answer. You remain mortal, Euryalus said softly. Athena made you monster but left you vulnerable to death. Perhaps even that is part of the curse, the knowledge that eventually your suffering will end, but only through violence, only when someone brave or foolish enough comes to claim your head. The three sisters sat in the cave as night deepened around them. Three monsters, three victims of divine injustice, finding solace in each other's company. Over the following months and years, they built a life together in that desolate place. It was not happiness, how could it be? But it was survival, and sometimes survival is all one can hope for. The cave became their home. They expanded it, carved chambers deeper into the rock, created spaces for sleeping and storing the few possessions they had. The serpents on their heads learned to coexist, sometimes even to communicate with each other in ways beyond human understanding. Stheno was the fierce one, quick to anger, never accepting their fate but raging against it. She would stand at the mouth of the cave and scream curses at the gods, daring them to show themselves, to face her wrath. The serpents on her head would rise up in fury, hissing and striking at the empty air. Euryalus was gentler, more resigned to their existence. She tried to find beauty in their desolate home. She would collect interesting stones from the beach, arrange them in patterns, create art from their exile. She sang sometimes, though her voice had been changed by the transformation into something eerie and multiplied. And Medusa carried her grief like a stone in her chest, heavy and cold. She could not rage like Stheno, nor accept like Euryalus. She existed in a state of perpetual mourning for the life she had lost, the woman she had been. But there were moments, rare, precious moments, when something like peace descended upon her. She would sit at the entrance to the cave, watching the sun set over the endless sea, and remember that she was still capable of perceiving beauty. The serpents on her head would settle into drowsy stillness. The sound of waves crashing against rocks became a kind of music. She learned the rhythms of this wild place, when storms would come, when the tide would be high or low, when certain birds migrated past their lonely cliff. She learned which plants were edible, which fish could be caught in the tidal pools, how to survive in a place no human would willingly inhabit. And slowly, very slowly, she began to understand her curse more fully. Her gaze did not simply kill, it preserved. Every living thing she turned to stone remained perfectly frozen in that moment of transformation. The stone statues that began to accumulate around their cave were not rotting corpses, but eternal monuments to the instant of their death. Sometimes travelers would come, despite the remoteness of their location. Sailors blown off course, adventurers seeking fame. Foolish young men dared by their companions to find the Gorgon's lair. Medusa tried to warn them away. She would call out from the darkness of the cave, her voice distorted and inhuman, begging them to flee, to leave this cursed place. Most did not listen. They came seeking either to kill the monster or to prove their bravery. They came with swords and spears, with prayers to various gods on their lips, with hearts full of confidence in their own strength. And one by one, they met her gaze and became stone. A garden of statues grew around the cave, warriors frozen mid-charge, adventurers with their weapons raised, sailors with terror on their faces. Each one a person who had lived and breathed, who had families and dreams and futures, each one now eternal stone, trapped forever in their final moment. Medusa wept for every one of them. She did not choose this. She did not want to kill, but she could not control it, could not prevent it. To be looked upon was to be a killer. That was the nature of Athena's curse. The statues became a warning to others. Approach the Gorgon's lair and suffer their fate. But they also became companions of a sort, silent witnesses to the sisters' existence. Medusa would walk among them sometimes, looking at their frozen faces, wondering who they had been, what lives they had led. There was a young man, barely more than a boy, his face showing more excitement than fear in that final instant. Had he been seeking glory, trying to prove himself to his father? She would never know. There was an older warrior, scarred and weathered, who had probably fought in many battles. His expression showed grim determination even in death. He had known what he was facing, and had come anyway, perhaps tired of living, perhaps seeking one final glorious end. There was a woman, yes, a woman, dressed in armor, her face fierce and beautiful. She had been a warrior in her own right, a rarity in the world of men. Medusa spent long hours looking at her statue, wondering at her story, feeling a kinship with this woman who had defied convention. The Garden of Stone grew year by year, a monument to Medusa's curse and to her grief. Stheno and Euryale tried to comfort her, but there was only so much they could do. They too carried their own griefs, their own rage at the injustice of their existence. Sometimes the sisters would talk through the long nights, sharing memories of when they had been human, when they had been beautiful and mortal and free. They would remember sunshine on their faces without fear, looking into another person's eyes and seeing recognition and warmth, rather than horror and death. "Do you think," Medusa asked one night as they sat around a small fire, "that we deserved this? That perhaps we were too proud of our beauty, too vain, and this is our punishment?" "No," Stheno said fiercely. "We did nothing wrong. Beauty is not a crime. Being desired is not a sin. Athena punished us not for any wrongdoing, but because we threatened her, because we reminded the gods that mortals can possess beauty that rivals the divine." "Perhaps there is no justice in the world," Euryale said quietly. "Perhaps there is only power, and those who have it do as they will to those who do not." Medusa thought of the guard she had killed on her first night of exile. She thought of all the statues in the garden outside. She thought of Poseidon, who had violated her with impunity, and Athena, who had punished the victim rather than the perpetrator. "If that is true," she said slowly, "then the world is a darker place than I ever imagined when I was human." "The world has always been dark," Stheno said. "We just couldn't see it when we were beautiful and protected. Beauty is a kind of blindness. It shields you from certain truths. Now that we are monsters, we see clearly. And perhaps that was the final cruelty of Athena's curse. Not just the transformation into something hideous, not just the isolation and the killing gaze, but the clarity. The understanding that the gods were not just, that the world was not fair. That innocence was no protection against suffering. Medusa, the priestess, had believed in divine justice, in the goodness of the gods, in meaning and order. Medusa the Gorgon knew better. She had been forced to see the truth of the world, and it was a bitter knowledge indeed. Years passed in their exile. The seasons changed, the moon waxed and waned, the garden of stone statues grew ever larger. Medusa's mortal body did not age as a human's would. The curse had changed her in ways that extended beyond the visible, slowing her aging, preserving her in this half-mortal, half-monstrous state. But she could feel time passing nonetheless. She could feel herself changing, hardening, becoming less the frightened girl who had fled Athens and more something else, something colder, more bitter, more dangerous. The serpents on her head grew longer, more venomous. Her gaze grew stronger, able to petrify with just a glance, not even requiring full eye contact. Her body became powerful in unexpected ways. She could move within human speed when needed, strike with strength that belied her frame. She was becoming truly the monster that Athena had made her. And yet, some part of her, some stubborn, aching part, remembered what it was to be human, remembered kindness and love and hope, remembered the scent of flowers in Athena's temple, and the sound of hymns at dawn and the feeling of belonging somewhere. To something, to someone. That part of her mourned constantly, a grief that never fully healed. The three sisters existed in their lonely exile, neither fully alive nor truly dead, trapped in a space between human and monster, victim and horror. And then one day, word reached them through the few sources they still had, through dreams and omens, and the whispered warnings of spirits that dwelt in that desolate place. A hero was coming. A young man named Perseus, blessed by the gods, equipped with divine weapons, sent on a quest to claim the head of Medusa. The hunt had begun. Far from the desolate shores where the Gorgons dwelt, on the island of Seriphos in the heart of the Aegean Sea, there lived a young man named Perseus. He was extraordinary in ways he did not yet fully understand. His mother was Danae, a princess of Argos, and his father, though this was spoken of only in whispers, was Zeus himself, king of the gods. The god had come to Danae in a shower of golden light, penetrating the bronze chamber where her father had imprisoned her, and from that divine union, Perseus had been born. But being the son of Zeus was not always a blessing. In fact, it often brought more danger than glory. Perseus had lived a difficult life. His grandfather, King Acrisius, had locked Danae away because of a prophecy that her son would one day kill him. When Perseus was born, despite these precautions, Acrisius had sealed both mother and infant in a wooden chest and cast them into the sea, hoping the waves would do what he couldn't bring himself to do directly. But Zeus had protected his son. The chest had washed ashore on Seriphos, where a kind fisherman named Dictys had found them and taken them in. Perseus had grown to manhood there, raised by his mother and Dictys, living a simple life as a fisherman, knowing he was different, but not yet understanding his true destiny. He was strong and quick, with his father's golden hair and his mother's gentle eyes. He was brave but not reckless, kind but not weak. He had his mother's compassion and something of his father's pride, a dangerous combination, as he was about to discover. The trouble began with King Polydectes. Polydectes was the ruler of Seriphos, brother to the kind fisherman Dictys, who had saved Perseus and his mother. But where Dictys was gentle and good, Polydectes was cruel and cunning. He was a man who took what he wanted and cared nothing for the suffering he caused, and he wanted Danae. From the moment he had seen Perseus's mother, Polydectes had desired her. She was still beautiful despite the hardships of her life, still possessed of that noble bearing that marked her as a princess, even in exile. He had propositioned her countless times, promising her comfort and status if she would become his wife, or even just his concubine. Danae had refused every advance. She had been violated once by a god, had borne the consequences of divine desire, and she would not willingly place herself in such a position again. She belonged to herself now, and no king, no matter how powerful, would change that. But Polydectes was not a man who accepted refusal gracefully. The only thing preventing him from simply taking what he wanted was Perseus. The young man had grown strong and capable, respected among the people of Seriphos. He protected his mother fiercely, and Polydectes knew that any overt move against Danae would result in confrontation with her son. So the king began to plot. He needed to remove Perseus from the equation, to send him away, or better yet, to his death, so that Danae would be left vulnerable and alone. The opportunity came during a feast. Polydectes announced that he intended to marry, not Danae, but another woman, Hippodamia, a princess from a neighboring island. It was a lie, of course, but Perseus did not know that. The king declared that all the young men of his court must bring gifts for the bride-to-be, lavish presents to honor the occasion. The tradition was to bring horses, fine steeds, expensive and difficult to acquire. It was a way for the nobles to display their wealth and status. But Perseus had no wealth. He was a fisherman's son, owner of nothing but his nets and his small boat. He could not afford a horse, could barely afford to feed himself and his mother most months. The other young men at the feast began to boast of the gifts they would bring: magnificent stallions, mare with fine bloodlines, horses trained for war or racing. Each tried to outdo the others, their voices growing louder and more competitive. Perseus sat in silence, his cheeks burning with shame. He had nothing to offer, no way to participate in this display of wealth. He was the son of Zeus, but what good did that do him here now when he could not even afford a simple gift? Polydectes noticed his silence, of course. The king had planned for this moment, had orchestrated it carefully. "And you, Perseus," Polydectes called out, his voice carrying across the hall. "What gift will you bring to honor my bride?" All eyes turned to Perseus. He felt the weight of their attention, the mixture of curiosity and contempt. They all knew he was poor. This was meant to humiliate him. Pride, that dangerous inheritance from his divine father, flared hot in his chest. "I have no horse to give," Perseus said, standing so that he faced the king directly. "But I am the son of Zeus, descended from the greatest of the gods. If you wish it, I will bring you a gift more valuable than any horse. Name it and I will acquire it for you." The hall fell silent. It was a rash promise, the kind of boast that heroes make in stories before they are brought low by fate. Polydectes' eyes gleamed with malicious satisfaction. "Any gift?" the king asked softly. "You will bring me anything I name." "I swear it," Perseus said, too young and too proud to see the trap closing around him. "Then bring me the head of Medusa." The words fell into the hall like stones into still water. Someone gasped. Another man whispered a prayer. Everyone knew the name, knew the story. Medusa the Gorgon, the monster with serpents for hair, the creature whose gaze turned living flesh to stone. She dwelt at the edge of the world in a place no sane person would venture. Warriors and heroes had sought her out, thinking to claim her head as a trophy, and none had returned. It was a death sentence disguised as a quest. Perseus felt his blood run cold, but he kept his face carefully neutral. He could not take back his words, could not admit that he had spoken rashly. To do so would be to lose all honor, to prove himself a boastful fool. And more than that, he suddenly understood what Polydectes was doing. This was not about a wedding gift. This was about removing Perseus from Seriphos, about sending him to his death, so that the king could claim his mother. Rage and fear warred in Perseus's chest, but he forced himself to bow slightly, to accept the challenge with outward calm. "Then I will bring you Medusa's head," he said. "I swear it on my father Zeus's name." The hall erupted into conversation, some impressed by his courage, others certain they were witnessing a dead man's final boast. Polydectes smiled, a cold and satisfied expression. "I look forward to your return," the king said, though both of them knew he expected no such thing. Perseus left the feast as soon as he could, his mind racing. What had he done? What foolish pride had driven him to make such a promise? He went to his mother, told her what had happened. Danae wept, clinging to her son, begging him not to go, to flee the island instead, to take her away from Polydectes and his schemes. But Perseus could not flee. He had sworn an oath, invoked his father's name. To break such a vow would bring shame not just on himself, but on Zeus, and the gods did not take such insults lightly. "I must try," he told his mother. "Perhaps the gods will aid me. Perhaps my father will intervene." But he did not truly believe it. Zeus had countless children, mortal and immortal. Why would the king of the gods concern himself with one more half-mortal son facing an impossible task? Perseus spent the following days preparing for a journey he did not expect to survive. He gathered what supplies he could: a sword, simple and well-made but nothing special, a leather bag for carrying provisions, warm clothes for traveling. He went to the temple of Zeus on Seriphos, a small shrine compared to the grand temples in Athens or Olympia, and made an offering, a portion of his catch, the best fish he had taken that week. It was all he had to give. "Father," he prayed, feeling foolish even as he spoke to the painted statue, "I am Perseus, your son. I go to face the Gorgon Medusa, to fulfill an oath made in pride and rashness. If ever you have cared for me, if ever I have mattered to you at all, I beg you, grant me some aid. Grant me some chance of survival." The statue was silent. The temple was empty. Perseus felt despair settling over him like a heavy cloak. He was about to leave when the air in the temple changed, became charged, electric, as if a storm was approaching, though the sky outside was clear. Two figures materialized before him, shimmering into existence like heat haze becoming solid. The first was a woman of terrible beauty, tall and commanding, with gray eyes that seemed to see through him to his very soul. She wore armor that gleamed like silver, and she carried a great spear and shield. Her presence filled the temple with power and majesty. Athena, the second, was younger, more playful in appearance, with a mischievous smile and winged sandals on his feet. He carried a staff entwined with serpents, and there was something quick and clever in his eyes: Hermes. Perseus fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the presence of divinity. These were not minor spirits or lesser gods. These were Olympians, two of the most powerful beings in existence. "Rise, Perseus," Athena commanded, her voice clear and strong. "We have heard your prayer, though not for the reasons you imagine." Perseus stood on trembling legs. "My lady, you go to face Medusa," Athena continued. "This pleases me. The Gorgon is a blight upon the world, a monster that has killed too many. Her existence is an affront to order and civilization." Perseus noticed something in her tone when she spoke of Medusa. Not just disgust, but something personal, something bitter. He did not know the history between goddess and Gorgon, did not understand that Athena herself had created the monster she now wished destroyed. "I cannot face her alone," Perseus said. "She is too powerful. Her gaze alone—" "Which is why we will help you," Hermes interrupted, his voice lighter, almost amused. "Consider it divine intervention, young hero. The gods have taken an interest in your quest, but why?" Perseus asked, confused. "Why would you help me?" Athena and Hermes exchanged a glance, some communication passing between them that Perseus could not interpret. "The gods have their reasons," Athena said finally. "It is enough that we offer our aid. Will you accept it?" What choice did he have? Perseus bowed his head. "I am honored beyond measure, my lady, my lord. I accept gratefully." "Good," Hermes said, and produced from seemingly nowhere a pair of sandals, the same winged sandals he wore. "These are the Talaria, my own sandals. They will allow you to fly, to move swifter than any mortal. With these you can approach the Gorgon's lair and escape once your task is complete." He handed them to Perseus, who took them with reverent care. They were lighter than they looked, the wings on them seeming to flutter with their own life. Athena stepped forward next, removing the great shield she carried. "This is my aegis, my shield. Its surface is polished to a mirror shine. You must never look directly at Medusa, or you will be turned to stone. But you can look at her reflection in this shield. Use it to guide your strike." She gave him the shield, and Perseus nearly staggered under its weight before he adjusted. The surface was indeed mirror-bright, showing his own face staring back at him. "You will also need this," Hermes said, producing a curved sword, its blade dark and strange. An adamantine sickle, forged in the depths of the earth from the hardest substance in existence. It is the only blade sharp enough to cut through a Gorgon's scales and separate her head from her body. Perseus accepted the sword, feeling its weight, its perfect balance. It was a weapon worthy of legend. "Finally," Athena said, "you will need to know where to find her. The Gorgons dwell at the edge of the world, in a place no mortal can locate without guidance. You must seek the Grey sisters, who are kin to the Gorgons. They alone know the location of their lair. The Grey? Perseus asked. 3 ancient women who share one eye and one tooth among them, Hermes explained. They dwell in a cave at the foot of Mount Atlas. You must steal their eye and refuse to return it until they tell you what you wish to know. Steal from old women? Perseus said, troubled. That seems... They are not truly women, Athena interrupted sharply. They are ancient spirits, neither mortal nor fully divine. They will not cooperate unless forced. You must be willing to do what is necessary, Perseus, or you will fail. Perseus nodded slowly, trying to absorb everything. He was being asked to become a thief, to threaten helpless old women, to murder. For what else was beheading Medusa but murder? A creature who had apparently done nothing to him personally, but he had sworn an oath, and the gods themselves were commanding him. There is one more thing, Hermes said, producing a leather bag, supple and well made. Once you have taken Medusa's head, you must place it immediately in this kibisis, this magical bag. Even in death, her gaze retains its power. Anyone who looks upon her severed head will still be turned to stone. Even in death? Perseus asked, horrified. The curse does not end with death, Athena said, and there was something like satisfaction in her voice. Medusa will be dangerous for all eternity, which is why her head once severed must be brought to me. I will mount it on my aegis, on this very shield you now hold. Her power will serve me, protect me, become a weapon in my arsenal. Perseus felt a chill run down his spine. There was something disturbing about Athena's eagerness to possess Medusa's head, something that suggested motives beyond simple justice or the removal of a monster. But he was in no position to question the goddess. I understand, he said. I will do as you command. Then go, Athena said. Prove yourself a true hero, Perseus. Prove yourself worthy of your divine blood. The gods vanished as suddenly as they had appeared, leaving Perseus alone in the temple with his divine gifts. He looked down at the winged sandals, the mirror-bright shield, the deadly sickle. He was equipped now like a true hero of legend, armed and blessed by the gods themselves. But he did not feel like a hero. He felt like a pawn in games he did not understand, being moved across a board by players whose motivations he could not fathom. Still, he had no choice but to continue forward. Perseus returned home one last time. He embraced his mother, promised her he would return, though they both knew he might be lying. Danae gave him a small token, a lock of her hair tied with a thread to carry with him for luck. Come back to me, she whispered. You are all I have in this world. I will try, Perseus promised. And if I do not return, know that I died trying to protect you from Polydectes. He said goodbye to Dictys, the kind fisherman who had been more of a father to him than Zeus had ever been. The old man gripped his shoulder tightly, unable to speak through his emotions, and then at dawn, Perseus put on the winged sandals. They came to life beneath his feet, and suddenly he was rising into the air, soaring above the island, above the glittering sea. The wind rushed past him, and despite everything, despite the fear and the impossible task ahead, he felt a moment of pure exhilaration. He was flying. He was really flying. Below him, Seriphos grew smaller, becoming just another island in the vast Aegean. And ahead of him lay the unknown, a journey to the edge of the world, to face ancient spirits and claim forbidden knowledge, and ultimately to confront a monster who had once been a woman, cursed by the very goddess who now sent him to kill her. Perseus flew west, toward Mount Atlas, toward the Grey, toward his destiny. Behind him on Seriphos, King Polydectes smiled and began making plans for Danae, certain that he had sent Perseus to his death, certain that soon the young man's mother would have no protector and no choice. He did not know that sometimes, when the gods take interest in mortal affairs, the outcomes are not what anyone expects. The hunt had truly begun. Perseus flew for days, guided by instinct and by the divine gifts he carried. The winged sandals seemed to know where to take him, carrying him westward across the endless sea, over islands and coastlines he had never seen, toward lands that existed at the very edge of the known world. He flew over the great kingdoms of the mainland, over Thebes and Corinth, over the mountains where the Titans had once walked. over forests so ancient and dense that no human had ever penetrated their depths. He saw temples gleaming white on distant hilltops, saw smoke rising from cities, saw the ordered world of mortals growing smaller and more distant behind him. And then he passed beyond the familiar, into regions where the maps became uncertain and the stories grew strange. The sea below him changed color, becoming darker, more ominous. The islands he passed were barren and rocky, inhospitable to human life. The sun itself seemed different here, colder somehow, its light less welcoming. He was approaching the boundaries of the world, the places where earth and sky and sea met in ways that defied mortal understanding. Finally, after what might have been 3 days or 5, time moved strangely in this liminal space. Perseus saw his destination rising before him, Mount Atlas. It was a mountain unlike any he had ever seen. It towered impossibly high, its peak lost in clouds that seemed to be more than simple weather. They roiled and twisted with colors that had no names, with lights that hurt to look at directly. This was the mountain where, it was said, the Titan Atlas stood holding up the sky itself, condemned to that eternal task as punishment for his rebellion against Zeus. Perseus could feel the weight of that burden, even from a distance, the pressure of infinity, the strain of holding worlds apart. At the base of the mountain, carved into rock as black as obsidian, was a cave. No light came from within, though Perseus could sense something alive in that darkness, something ancient and aware, the Cave of the Graeae. Perseus landed at the entrance, his feet touching solid ground for the first time in days. The winged sandals folded themselves neatly, becoming dormant. He stood there for a moment, gathering his courage, trying to prepare himself for what was to come. The Graeae, the Grey Sisters, the Grey Ones, the ancient daughters of Phorcys and Sato. They were sisters to the Gorgons, related by blood to Medusa herself. They had been old since before the world was young, existing in a state between living and dead, sharing one eye and one tooth among the 3 of them. Athena had told him to steal their eye, to force them to reveal the location of the Gorgon's lair. It seemed cruel, dishonorable. But Perseus had no choice. He would do what was necessary. He took a deep breath and entered the cave. Darkness swallowed him immediately, so complete that he could not see his own hand before his face. The air was cold and damp, smelling of age and earth and something else, something indefinable and unsettling. And then he heard them, voices, 3 of them, layered and echoing strangely in the darkness. They spoke to each other in a language that was almost Greek, but not quite, older than the language of Homer, ancient and worn smooth by countless centuries. Sister, pass me the eye. I see nothing worth seeing. Here, take it. And the tooth I would speak more clearly. Always speaking, always seeing. What is there to see in this darkness? What is there to say that has not been said 1,000,000 times? Perseus moved carefully forward, guided by their voices. His eyes were adjusting slightly to the darkness, or perhaps there was some faint phosphorescence in the cave, walls that provided the barest illumination. And then he saw them. The Grey sat in a rough circle on the cave floor. They were impossibly old, their skin grey as ash, wrinkled beyond measure. Their hair was wispy and colorless, hanging in thin strands around faces that seemed more skull than flesh. Their bodies were hunched and withered, more corpse than living woman. But they moved, spoke, existed in defiance of death itself. As Perseus watched from the shadows, he saw one of them, he could not tell which, they were so similar, reach up and remove something from her face. An eye, a single milky white eye that she plucked from her empty socket and held in her palm. Here. Sister, she said, extending her hand toward the figure beside her. This was his moment. Perseus darted forward, his movement swift and silent. Before the second sister could take the eye, he snatched it from the first one's outstretched palm. The reaction was immediate and terrible. All 3 Grey shrieked, a sound like metal scraping against stone, like nails on a coffin lid. They thrashed and grasped at the air, suddenly blind, suddenly helpless. The eye. Where is the eye? Who has taken it? Who dares? Give it back. Give it back! We cannot see. Their clawed hands reached out frantically, searching. Perseus stepped back, holding the eye carefully. It was warm in his palm, disturbingly warm, and it seemed to pulse with its own life, its own awareness. He could feel it trying to turn, to look at him even though it was no longer in anyone's head. "I have your eye," Perseus said, his voice steady despite his revulsion. "And I will return it, but only if you tell me what I wish to know." The grey fell silent, their eyeless faces turning toward the sound of his voice. Without the eye to see, they seemed even more corpse-like, even more wrong. "Who are you, thief?" one hissed. "What mortal dares to rob the daughters of Phorcys?" "I am Perseus, son of Zeus. I seek the Gorgons. Tell me where they dwell, and I will return your eye unharmed." "The Gorgons!" Another sister laughed, a sound like dry leaves crumbling. "So you seek your own death, foolish boy?" "Many have asked us this question," the third said. "Many heroes, many brave fools. We told them all the same thing. Death awaits at the edge of the world. Turn back while you can." "I cannot turn back," Perseus said. "I have sworn an oath. I must face Medusa. Tell me where to find her." The three sisters conferred in whispers too low for him to hear clearly, passing words between them like they might have passed the eye. Finally, one spoke for all of them. "We will tell you," she said. "But know this, Perseus, son of Zeus. We know what you are. We can smell divine blood even without our eye to see. You go to kill our sister's child, our own kin. Medusa is blood of our blood." Perseus felt a chill. "She is your kin?" "She is our niece," another sister said. "Daughter of our brother and sister, though cursed by Athena into the form she now wears. She lives with her sisters, our other nieces, Stheno and Euryale, and you go to murder her." "She is a monster," Perseus said, though the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. "She has killed countless people with her gaze." "She is a victim," the third sister said sharply. "Made monster by divine injustice, punished for a crime she did not commit. And now you, blessed by the very goddess who cursed her, go to finish what Athena started." The words struck Perseus like physical blows. He thought of Athena's eagerness to possess Medusa's head, her satisfaction at the thought of the Gorgon's death. He thought of the strange undertones in her voice when she spoke of the monster. What happened to her?" Perseus asked. "How did she become a Gorgon?" "That is not our story to tell," the first sister said. "And you have not come for stories. You have come for directions. So listen well, mortal, for we will say this only once." And they told him. They described the journey he must take. Farther west still, beyond the pillars of Hercules, where the Mediterranean met the great ocean that circled the world. There, at the very edge of existence, where the sun sets and the stars are born, he would find a desolate coastline, black cliffs rising from dark waters. "Look for the Garden of Stone," one sister said. "Look for the statues of men frozen in their final moments. That is where the Gorgons dwell, in a cave carved from those black cliffs by wind and wave and time. They sleep during the day," another added. "The sun pains them, as do all things bright and beautiful. If you wish to strike at Medusa, you must come while she sleeps, while all three sisters rest. That is your only chance. But know this," the third sister said, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried perfectly in the darkness. "Stheno and Euryale are immortal. You cannot kill them, cannot harm them, and they will pursue you once they wake. They will hunt you to the ends of the earth for killing their sister. And one more thing, hero," the first sister said, and there was something almost like pity in her ancient voice. "When you strike off Medusa's head, something will be born from her blood. Poseidon's children, conceived in violence, waiting all these years to be released. You will face more than you expect." Perseus stood in the darkness, holding the eye, processing everything they had told him. He had expected simple directions, not this. Not the revelation that Medusa was a victim, not the warning of immortal pursuers, not the prophecy of something being born from her death. But he had sworn an oath. The gods themselves had sent him on this quest. He could not turn back now, no matter what truths he learned. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I will remember your words." He stepped forward and placed the eye gently in one of the sisters' outstretched hands. She snatched it quickly, pressed it back into her empty socket, and blinked as vision returned. All three sisters turned to look at him properly now, their shared eye passing between them rapidly so each could see him clearly. "You have honor at least," one said. "You returned our eye as promised." You will need more than honor to survive, another said. Go then, Perseus, son of Zeus, the third said. Go to your destiny. Kill our niece, claim your trophy, please your goddess. But know that every choice has consequences, and not all victories are glorious. Perseus bowed to them, though he wasn't sure why, respect perhaps, or guilt, and turned to leave the cave. As he reached the entrance, one final voice called after him. She was beautiful once, you know, before the curse, before Athena's wrath. Medusa was beautiful and kind and innocent. Remember that, hero, when you strike off her head. Remember that monsters are made, not born. Perseus stepped out into the grey light of day, his heart heavy with knowledge he wished he did not possess. But there was no time to dwell on it. He had his directions. He knew where to go. The winged sandals stirred to life beneath his feet, ready to carry him onward. He took to the air once more, flying west toward the setting sun, toward the edge of the world. As he flew, he tried to steel himself for what was to come. He told himself that Medusa was a monster, that she had killed innocent people, that removing her from the world was a righteous act. But the Greyer's words echoed in his mind. She was beautiful once. She is a victim. Monsters are made, not born. The journey continued. Perseus flew over waters that grew stranger, darker, populated by creatures that should not exist. Serpents as large as ships, fish with human faces, islands that moved when you weren't looking. This was the realm of myth made real, where the boundaries between possible and impossible blurred. He saw the pillars of Hercules rising like great monuments from the sea, the mountains that marked the edge of the Mediterranean, beyond which lay the vast and unknown ocean. He passed between them, feeling the air change, the very quality of reality shifting. And then, after what felt like both an eternity and no time at all, he saw it. The black cliffs, the desolate shoreline, the place where the sun was setting in colors too vivid to be natural, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold that looked like blood and fire. And there, at the base of the cliffs, just as the Grey had described, the Garden of Stone. Dozens of statues, perhaps hundreds scattered across the rocky ground, warriors and sailors, adventurers and fools, all frozen forever in expressions of terror. Some had their weapons raised, others were fleeing, still others were frozen in the act of screaming. Each one a person who had come seeking glory or revenge, or simply answers. Each one now eternal stone, a warning to all who would follow. Perseus descended slowly, landing at the edge of the garden. The winged sandals became still. He stood there, surrounded by the petrified dead, and felt the weight of what he was about to do. Somewhere in the cave beyond, Medusa slept. The victim-made monster, the beautiful priestess transformed into horror, waiting unknowingly for the hero sent to end her existence. Perseus drew the adamantine sickle. He raised Athena's mirror-bright shield. He steeled himself for murder, because that's what this was, whatever noble words he dressed it in. Murder, but he had no choice. The gods had commanded it. His oath bound him. His mother's safety depended on his success. So Perseus walked forward, toward the cave, toward the sleeping Gorgons, toward the act that would make him a hero or damn him forever. The sun continued its descent toward the horizon, and shadows grew long across the garden of stone statues. And in the darkness of the cave, Medusa dreamed of temples and flowers, and a life that had been stolen from her so long ago. Perseus moved through the garden of stone with careful, silent steps. Each statue he passed seemed to watch him with sightless eyes, their frozen expressions a chorus of warnings he could not heed. Here was a young warrior, his sword raised high, his mouth open in a battle cry that would never be completed. The stone captured every detail, the individual links in his armor, the tendons standing out on his neck, the desperate courage in his eyes as he faced his death. There was an older man, his hands raised as if to shield himself, his face showing not courage but simple, terrible fear. He had known in that final instant that he had made a terrible mistake. That knowledge was preserved forever in stone, and there, Perseus stopped, his breath catching. There was a woman. She was young, dressed in the remnants of what had once been fine traveling clothes. Her face was turned away, as if in those final moments she had tried to avert her gaze to save herself by not looking. But it had not been enough. The curse had taken her anyway. What had brought her to this desolate place? What desperation or determination had driven her to seek out the Gorgons? Perseus would never know. None of the statues could speak, could explain, could offer their stories. They were simply there, eternal witnesses to their own destruction. He forced himself to move forward, past the Garden of the Dead, toward the mouth of the cave. It yawned before him like the entrance to the underworld itself, dark, forbidding, radiating a cold that had nothing to do with temperature. This was the chill of ancient power, of divine curse, of a place where normal laws did not fully apply. Perseus paused at the threshold, adjusting his grip on the adamantine sickle. His other hand held Athena's shield, angled so he could see its mirror-bright surface. He would have to navigate using only reflections, never looking directly at anything within the cave. It would be like moving through the world backward, seeing everything reversed, trusting his eyes to make sense of images that were fundamentally distorted. But it was his only chance of survival. He took a deep breath, whispered a prayer to his father Zeus, though he had little faith it would be answered, and stepped into the darkness. The change was immediate and disorienting. Inside the cave, the air was thick and strange, carrying scents that made no sense. Flowers and rot, salt water and incense, honey and venom all mixed together. The darkness was not complete. There was a faint, sickly luminescence coming from somewhere deeper within, a greenish-gold light that seemed to pulse like a slow heartbeat. Perseus moved forward carefully, watching the shield's reflection. The cave was larger than he had expected, opening up into a vast chamber whose ceiling was lost in shadow. The walls were rough black stone, volcanic in origin, but they had been carved in places with images, serpents and waves, women and monsters, scenes of transformation and suffering. Medusa's work, perhaps, or her sisters. Had they tried to tell their story in stone, to leave some record of what had been done to them? He moved deeper, following the faint light. The cave branched and twisted, a natural labyrinth worn into the cliff over millennia. Once or twice he heard sounds, a distant hissing, a whisper of movement, the soft rush of breathing. He froze each time, his heart pounding, waiting to see if he had been discovered, but nothing attacked. Whatever sounds he heard remained distant, uninterested in his presence. Finally, after what felt like hours of careful navigation, Perseus found himself at the entrance to a larger chamber. The greenish-gold light was stronger here, emanating from the room beyond. He pressed himself against the cave wall and angled his shield carefully to see what lay ahead. And there they were, the Gorgons. 3 figures lay sleeping in the chamber, arranged in a rough circle. The space around them was surprisingly domestic. There were woven mats on the floor, clay vessels for water and oil, even a small loom in one corner with a half-finished tapestry still stretched across it. They had tried in whatever way they could to maintain some semblance of normal life even in exile. But there was nothing normal about the sleeping forms. 2 of them were clearly inhuman, monstrous in ways that Perseus could barely process, even in reflection. Their bodies were scaled. Their limbs ended in claws, their faces were dragon-like with fangs and protruding jaws. These must be Steno and Euryale, the immortal sisters. The serpents on their heads were larger, more numerous, more aggressive even in sleep. Some of them still moving, still watching, never fully resting. But the third was different. She was smaller than her sisters, more delicate. Her body retained more human characteristics. Legs that were legs, arms that were arms, a torso that suggested the woman she had once been beneath the curse. Her face, seen in reflection, was a strange mixture of beautiful and terrible. The structure was still lovely. High cheekbones, a graceful jaw, lips that might once have been praised by poets. But the skin had that greenish-gray tint. The teeth visible through slightly parted lips were too sharp. And the serpents that grew from her scalp were smaller than her sisters, less aggressive but somehow more tragic for it. They slept too, coiled against her head, peaceful in their rest. Medusa. She lay curled on her side, one hand tucked beneath her cheek like a child. She looked vulnerable. She looked sad even in sleep. There was something in the set of her features, some lingering grief that not even slumber could erase. Perseus stood at the chamber entrance, the adamantine sickle in his hand, looking at her reflection in his shield, and felt something unexpected. Doubt. This was the monster he had been sent to kill. This sleeping figure, who had arranged flowers in a clay pot near her sleeping mat, who had tried to weave beauty on her loom, who curled up like someone seeking comfort in dreams. She is a victim, the Grey had said. Monsters are made, not born. Perseus thought of the guard in Athens turned to stone. He thought of all the statues in the garden outside. Medusa had killed them all, whether she wanted to or not. She was dangerous. She was deadly, but she had not chosen to be. For a long moment, Perseus stood frozen with indecision. He could leave. He could fly away, return to Seriphos, face Polydectes' anger and his mother's relief. He could refuse to be a pawn in Athena's game, refuse to kill a victim to satisfy a goddess's grudge. But then he thought of his mother, left alone with Polydectes. He thought of his oath sworn on Zeus's name. He thought of the shame of failure, of breaking a hero's promise. And he thought with cold pragmatism that Medusa's existence caused suffering. Every person who came near her died. Every living thing that met her gaze became stone. However unjust her curse, however much she was a victim, she was also dangerous. Perhaps death would be a mercy, a release from the nightmare of her existence. He was finding reasons, Perseus realized, justifications, ways to make what he was about to do seem noble, or at least necessary, but in his heart he knew the truth. He was going to kill her because the gods commanded it, because his pride demanded it, because he was afraid of the consequences of refusal. He was going to kill her because that's what heroes did. Perseus moved forward, silent as shadow, watching Medusa's reflection in his shield. He circled around her sleeping sisters, giving them as wide a berth as possible. Even in sleep, they radiated power and danger. If they woke, he would die. It was that simple. Step by careful step, he approached Medusa. The serpents on her head stirred slightly as he drew near, sensing something even in their sleep. A few raised their heads, tongues flickering, but they did not strike. They seemed confused, uncertain whether this presence was a threat. Perseus raised the adamantine sickle. In the reflection on his shield, he could see Medusa's neck, vulnerable and exposed. One strike, clean and quick, and it would be over. He positioned himself carefully, judging the angle, preparing for the blow, and Medusa's eyes opened, not fully, just a flutter of eyelids, the way someone wakes gradually from deep sleep. But enough for Perseus to see in reflection those eyes. Those cursed, terrible, powerful eyes that held divine power and endless grief. For one frozen instant, they stared at each other in the mirror of the shield. Perseus watching her reflection, Medusa confused and disoriented, not yet fully understanding what was happening. In that instant, Perseus saw something in her eyes, not the mindless fury of a monster, but intelligence, awareness, and a bone-deep exhaustion. She was tired, so tired. Tired of killing, tired of isolation, tired of existing as something between living and dead. And he saw the moment when she understood what he was, why he was there. Her eyes widened, not with rage, but with something that might have been relief. Finally, she whispered, her voice rough from sleep, distorted by her transformation but still recognizably human. Someone skilled enough to end this. She did not try to turn fully toward him, did not try to use her gaze as a weapon. Instead, she closed her eyes again, deliberately, protectively. Do it quickly, she said. Please, just quickly. Perseus stood frozen, the sickle raised, staring at her reflection. She was asking him to kill her, welcoming it. She wanted to die, of course she did. How could she not? Existence as a Gorgon was torture, killing everyone she looked at, living in isolation, trapped in a body she never chose. Death would be mercy, but somehow that made it worse. Not harder, but worse. Perseus had come prepared to fight a monster, to battle for his life against a terrible creature. He had not come prepared for this. For a victim who had been suffering for so long that death seemed like salvation. "I'm sorry," Perseus whispered. He didn't know why he said it. Heroes didn't apologize to monsters, but he said it anyway. Medusa's lips curved in something that might have been a smile. "You're kinder than most who have come here." The others wanted glory, wanted to prove themselves by killing the great monster. You sound like you mean it." "I do," Perseus said, and realized it was true. "I'm sorry for what was done to you. I'm sorry that I have to do this." "Don't be sorry," Medusa said softly, her eyes still closed. "Just do it, end it. Let me finally rest." Perseus adjusted his grip on the sickle. He steadied himself, watched the reflection, judged the angle one final time. "Will it hurt?" Medusa asked, her voice very small. "No," Perseus lied. "It will be quick." "You won't feel anything." "Good," she breathed. That's good." She was quiet for a moment, then spoke again quickly, as if afraid she would lose her courage. "Tell my story true if you can. Tell them I was not always this, that I served Athena faithfully, that I did not deserve," and her voice broke. "Tell them I tried to be good." "I will," Perseus promised, though he had no idea if he would keep that promise. Medusa took a deep breath, let it out slowly. "Thank you. For the mercy, for the end, thank you." And she tilted her head back slightly, exposing her neck fully, making it easier for him, offering herself to the blade. Perseus struck. The adamantine sickle was sharp beyond imagining, forged from the hardest substance in existence. It cut through flesh and bone and divine curse, as if they were nothing at all. One clean strike, just as he had promised. Medusa's body jerked once, a final spasm, and then went still. The serpents on her head writhed wildly for a moment, hissing and striking at nothing, and then they too fell limp, dead with their host. Blood, strange blood, darker than human blood, thick with divine power, poured from the severed neck. Where it touched the cave floor, it hissed and steamed, burning into the stone. Perseus quickly grabbed Medusa's severed head by the serpents, carefully keeping it angled away from him, looking only at its reflection. Even in death, the eyes held power. Even in death, she was dangerous. He shoved the head quickly into the kibisis, the magical bag Hermes had given him, and pulled the drawstring tight. It was done. Medusa was dead, and then the cave began to shake. The blood pouring from Medusa's body was doing something impossible. Where it pooled on the ground, things were forming, taking shape, being born from death itself. From the largest pool of blood rose a creature of impossible beauty, a horse, but not a horse. It had wings, great white wings that unfurled and filled the chamber. Its coat was pure white, gleaming like pearl, and its eyes were intelligent, knowing, almost divine Pegasus. The winged horse conceived in violence by Poseidon, waiting all these years within Medusa's cursed body to be released. And beside it, something else was forming. A figure, human-shaped but radiating power. A warrior, golden-armored, emerging fully grown from the blood. This was Chrysaor, the golden sword, Medusa's other child, born in the moment of her death. But Perseus had no time to marvel at these impossible births, because Medusa's sisters were waking. Stheno and Euryale rose from their sleep with roars that shook the cave. They saw their sister's headless body, saw the blood, saw Perseus with his bag and his weapon, and they understood immediately what had happened. Their grief and rage was a physical force, a wave of power that nearly knocked Perseus off his feet. "Murderer," Stheno screamed, her voice multiplied 100-fold, shaking loose stones from the cave ceiling. "Killer, you dare!" Euryale's cry was wordless, but somehow worse, pure anguish and fury combined. The sound of a heart breaking and reforming as rage. They lunged for him, faster than anything that size should be able to move. Perseus ran. He sprinted toward the cave entrance, the winged sandals already coming to life beneath his feet. Behind him, the immortal Gorgons gave chase, their claws scraping on stone, their serpentine hair hissing and screaming, their voices calling down curses in languages older than Greek. Perseus burst out of the cave and into the dying light of sunset. He leaped into the air, the sandals catching him, bearing him upward. But Stheno and Euryale could fly too. Their monstrous forms included great, leathery wings. They launched themselves after him, pursuing him into the sky. "You cannot escape us," Athena roared. "We will hunt you forever. We will find you wherever you hide. You killed our sister."
"She was innocent,"
Euryale cried. "She suffered enough, and you took even her life from her." Perseus flew as fast as the sandals would carry him, but the Gorgons were gaining. They were faster, stronger, driven by grief and vengeance. He was going to die. He had succeeded in his quest, but he would not survive to tell of it. Then he remembered Hades' helm. The helm of darkness that Hermes had given him, still tucked into his belt. The helm that could make the wearer invisible. Still flying, Perseus pulled out the helm and jammed it onto his head. Immediately he vanished from sight. The Gorgons, flying after him, suddenly found their quarry gone. They circled in confusion, screaming in frustration, searching the sky desperately. "Where is he?" Athena roared. "Where?" But Perseus was already far away, flying invisible through the darkening sky, carrying Medusa's head back toward the world of men, toward Seriphos, toward his mother. Behind him, Athena and Euryale continued their search, refusing to give up, swearing oaths of eternal vengeance. But Perseus had escaped. He had completed the impossible task. He had killed Medusa. He was a hero. As he flew through the night, invisible and alone, Perseus tried to feel triumphant. He tried to feel proud of his accomplishment. Instead, he felt only heavy grief for a woman who had thanked him for murdering her, and guilt for being the instrument of divine injustice. She tried to be good, Medusa had said. Perseus would remember those words for the rest of his life. Perseus flew through the night, invisible beneath Hades' helm, the kibises containing Medusa's head hanging heavy at his side. The weight of it was more than physical. It carried the burden of what he had done, of the life he had ended, of the promise he had made to tell her story true. Behind him, far in the distance, he could still hear the faint echoes of Athena and Euryale's grief-stricken cries. They would search for him forever, those immortal sisters. They would never stop hunting for their sister's killer. But invisible and swift, Perseus put miles between himself and the desolate shore, between himself and the cave that had been Medusa's prison and home. The journey back across the world took days. Though time moved strangely at such heights in such circumstances, Perseus flew over the great ocean, back toward the pillars of Hercules, back into the familiar waters of the Mediterranean. He flew without stopping, driven by exhaustion and determination in equal measure. The winged sandals never seemed to tire, carrying him endlessly through day and night, through storm and calm. And as he flew, events were already beginning to unfold. Events that would shape not just his own story, but the legend of Medusa herself. On the third day of his return journey, Perseus was flying over the kingdom of Ethiopia when he saw something that made him slow his flight. A young woman was chained to rocks at the edge of the sea. She was beautiful, with dark skin and darker hair, wearing only a simple white dress that was already soaked through by sea spray. She struggled against her chains, looking out at the water with an expression of absolute terror, and Perseus understood why. Rising from the waves was a creature of nightmare, a sea monster, massive and scaled, with teeth like swords and eyes that gleamed with mindless hunger. It was swimming directly toward the chained woman, drawn by her presence, intent on devouring her. Perseus did not hesitate. Whatever grief and guilt he carried over Medusa's death, he could not simply fly past a woman about to be killed. He dove toward the scene, removing Hades' helm so he would be visible again. The winged sandals carried him down with incredible speed. The woman, her name was Andromeda, though Perseus did not yet know it, looked up in shock as a young man descended from the sky itself, armed with strange weapons, moving with divine speed. "Hold on," Perseus shouted. "I will save you." The sea monster roared and lunged, its jaws opening wide enough to swallow a ship. Perseus drew the adamantine sickle and struck, cutting deep into the creature's flank. Dark blood, thick as oil, poured into the sea, but the monster was huge, powerful, and the wound only enraged it. It thrashed and struck at Perseus with claws and tail. Trying to smash him from the sky, Perseus flew higher, dodging, And then he remembered. He had a weapon far more powerful than any blade, the head of Medusa. He reached into the kibisis, carefully keeping his eyes averted, and pulled out the Gorgon's head by its serpentine hair. The serpents were still moving, he realized with shock. Even in death they writhed with some remnant of life or curse. And the eyes. He could feel the power radiating from them even without looking directly. Perseus turned the head toward the sea monster. "Look upon the face of the Gorgon," he shouted. The creature's eyes met Medusa's dead gaze. For one instant the monster froze, every muscle locked. And then, with a sound like breaking mountains, it transformed. Flesh became stone, scales became granite. The massive creature crashed back into the sea, now nothing more than a giant stone sculpture, sinking beneath the waves. Even in death, Medusa's power remained. Even severed from her body, her curse continued. Perseus quickly returned the head to the bag and flew to Andromeda. He broke her chains with the sickle, the adamantine blade cutting through iron as easily as it had cut through flesh, and caught her as she fell. "Who are you?" she gasped, clinging to him. "Are you a god?" "No," Perseus said. "Only a man with divine help." "Why were you chained here? What crime deserved such punishment?" And Andromeda told him her story. How her mother, Queen Cassiopeia, had boasted that her daughter was more beautiful than the Nereids, the sea nymphs. How Poseidon, offended on behalf of the nymphs, had sent the sea monster to ravage Ethiopia's coast. How the oracle had declared that only by sacrificing Andromeda could the kingdom be saved. Another victim of divine pride and godly vengeance. Another innocent punished for someone else's hubris. Perseus felt his anger at the gods, already kindled by Medusa's fate, burn hotter. "You are safe now," he told Andromeda. "I will speak to your father. No kingdom is worth the life of an innocent." He carried her back to the palace where her parents, King Cepheus and Queen Cassiopeia, greeted them with joy and disbelief. Perseus told them of the monster's defeat, and they offered him anything he desired as reward. "I ask only for your daughter's hand in marriage," Perseus said, looking at Andromeda, "if she will have me." And Andromeda, who had seen him descend from the sky like a hero from legend, who had been saved by this strange young man with divine gifts and a heavy sadness in his eyes, agreed. But there was a complication. Andromeda had already been promised to another man, Phineus, her uncle, a prince of the realm, and Phineus was not willing to give up his claim. At the wedding feast, Phineus arrived with armed men demanding that Andromeda be given to him as originally promised. When Cepheus refused, when Perseus stood to defend his bride, Phineus and his warriors attacked. The feast dissolved into chaos, swords drawn, men fighting, Andromeda screaming for it to stop. And Perseus, exhausted and pushed beyond patience, made a choice. "I try to do this peacefully," he shouted. "Anyone who wishes to live, close your eyes. Close your eyes now." Those loyal to Perseus and Cepheus obeyed. Phineus and his men, thinking it some kind of trick, kept their eyes open. Perseus reached into the kibisis once more and held up Medusa's severed head. The result was immediate and terrible. Phineus and every one of his warriors, perhaps 40 men in total, transformed instantly into stone. They stood frozen throughout the hall, their weapons raised, their faces locked in expressions of aggression and greed. The wedding guests who had closed their eyes opened them to find themselves surrounded by statues, by death incarnate, preserved forever. They looked at Perseus with new eyes then, not just as a hero, but as something dangerous, something to be feared. He carried death with him. He wielded power that could end anyone in an instant. Perseus saw their fear and felt something twist in his chest. He had become what Medusa had been, dangerous, deadly, someone to be approached with caution and dread. But he could put Medusa's head away, could choose when to use its power. She had never had that choice. Perseus and Andromeda left Ethiopia soon after, flying north toward Seriphos on the winged sandals. Perseus held his new bride carefully, one arm around her waist, the other clutching the kibisis. "What is in that bag?" Andromeda finally asked. "What weapon could turn men to stone with a glance?" "Something terrible," Perseus said quietly. "Something that was once a woman, cursed by the gods for crimes she did not commit." I carry her head, and even in death she serves purposes not her own. He told Andromeda the story as they flew, told her about Medusa's curse, about the quest, about the sleeping woman who had asked him to end her suffering. He told it true as he had promised, at least to this one person. Andromeda listened in silence, and when he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "The gods are cruel," she finally said. "I knew that already. My own mother's pride nearly killed me, but this is something else. To be punished for being violated, to be made monstrous for being beautiful. It's not right." "No," Perseus agreed. "It's not right. But it's the world we live in." They reached Seriphos as the sun was setting, painting the island in shades of gold and crimson. Perseus landed at his mother's house, eager to see her, to tell her he had survived. But Danae was not there. Instead, neighbors came out, their faces troubled and sympathetic. "She's at the temple," they told him, "seeking sanctuary. King Polydectes has been trying to force her to marry him since you left. When she refused, he threatened violence. She fled to the temple of Zeus for protection and has been there for weeks." Rage, pure burning rage, flooded through Perseus. This was what Polydectes had wanted all along. To send Perseus away, to leave Danae vulnerable, to take what he wanted by force. "Where is Polydectes now?" Perseus asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "At his palace," they said. "He's holding a feast, celebrating his upcoming marriage to your mother. He plans to drag her from the temple tomorrow, sanctuary or no sanctuary." Perseus did not waste time with words. He flew directly to the palace, Andromeda following on foot with Dictys, the kind fisherman who had been more father than Zeus ever was. The palace doors were open, the sound of revelry and drinking spilling out into the evening air. Perseus strode through them, the Kibisis at his side, his face set in grim determination. The great hall fell silent as he entered. King Polydectes sat at the head of a long table, surrounded by his cronies and supporters, a goblet of wine in his hand. "Perseus," the king said, and his voice carried false cheer and genuine surprise. "You're alive! I must admit I did not expect to see you again. Tell me, did you complete your quest? Did you bring me the head of Medusa? Or have you come to admit your failure?" "I completed the quest," Perseus said quietly. "I have brought you Medusa's head as promised." Polydectes laughed, a harsh and disbelieving sound. "Then show it to me, boy. Show me this impossible prize." "As you wish," Perseus said. "But first, where is my mother? Why does she cower in a temple, seeking protection from you?" Polydectes' smile faded. "Your mother will be my wife. It is already decided. She will submit, or she will suffer the consequences. You have no say in this matter, boy, quest or no quest." "I have every say," Perseus said. His voice was cold now, terrible. "I am the son of Zeus. I have been blessed by Athena and Hermes. I have traveled to the edge of the world and back, and I have killed a monster who never deserved to be a monster at all. I will not allow you to harm my mother." "Bold words," Polydectes sneered, "but you are still just a fisherman's brat." "Guards, seize him!" "Anyone who wants to live," Perseus said loudly, addressing the entire hall. "Close your eyes. Close them now and do not open them until I say it is safe." Some of the men understood, remembered the stories of the Gorgon's power, and squeezed their eyes shut. Others, including Polydectes and his closest supporters, thought it nonsense. "What foolishness is this?" the king demanded. "I will not." Perseus reached into the kibisis and pulled out Medusa's head one final time. "You wanted to see it," Perseus said. "Look upon the face of Medusa." Polydectes looked. His men looked. They could not help themselves. Curiosity and disbelief drew their eyes to the severed head Perseus held aloft, and they saw her. They saw the serpents writhing in her hair, the greenish-gray skin, the features caught between beauty and horror. They saw her eyes still open, still cursed, still deadly even in death. The transformation was instant. King Polydectes turned to stone mid-laugh, his expression forever frozen in arrogant mockery. His supporters became statues around the table, some still holding their wine goblets, others half risen from their seats. 20 men, perhaps 30, became stone in the span of a heartbeat. Perseus lowered the head and returned it to the bag. He turned to those who had closed their eyes. mostly servants and lower-ranking guards, and nodded to them. "You may open your eyes now. Tell everyone what you saw here. Tell them that King Polydectes is dead, turned to stone by his own arrogance and his mistreatment of a good woman." He walked out of the palace, leaving behind the garden of stone statues, and went to the temple to retrieve his mother. Danae wept when she saw him, clutching him tightly, unable to believe he had truly returned alive. "It's over," Perseus told her gently. "Polydectes is dead. You are safe, and I've brought someone for you to meet." He introduced Andromeda, and Danae embraced her future daughter-in-law with genuine warmth. The people of Seriphos, freed from Polydectes' tyranny, begged Perseus to become their king, but he refused. He wanted no throne, no kingdom. He had seen enough of power and its corruptions. Instead, he gave the crown to Dictys, the kind fisherman who had saved him and his mother so long ago. Dictys was reluctant, but Perseus insisted, and the people accepted him gladly. With his duty to Seriphos complete, Perseus knew he had one final obligation. He had to return Medusa's head to Athena, as the goddess had commanded. He flew to Athens, to the great temple on the Acropolis, the same temple where, years before, Medusa had served as a priestess, where she had been violated, where her curse had begun. Athena appeared to him there, materializing in the empty temple in all her divine glory. "You have succeeded," she said, and there was satisfaction in her voice. "I knew you would. Show me the head." Perseus pulled it from the kibisis and held it carefully, averting his own eyes. Athena took it from him without hesitation. Gods could not be turned to stone by the Gorgon's gaze, apparently. She examined it closely, turning it this way and that, a strange expression on her face. Was it triumph? Regret? Something else entirely? "Perfect," she said. "Her power remains even in death. I will mount her head upon my aegis, my shield. She will protect me in battle, turn my enemies to stone, serve me for all eternity." Perseus watched as the goddess produced the very shield he had borrowed, the mirror-bright aegis, and began to affix Medusa's severed head to its center. The serpents writhed weakly, no longer truly alive but not quite dead either, preserved in some liminal state between. "My lady," Perseus said carefully, "may I ask, why was she cursed in the first place? The Graeer told me she was innocent, that she had been violated in your temple. Is that true?" Athena's eyes flashed dangerously. "You question me, mortal?" "I seek understanding," Perseus said, standing his ground. "I killed her. I deserve to know why." For a long moment the goddess was silent. Then, surprisingly, she answered. "Poseidon violated her in my temple," Athena said flatly. "He desecrated my sacred space, broke my laws, insulted me before all Olympus. I could not punish him. He is too powerful, my uncle, one of the three great kings of the cosmos. But I could punish her." "But she was the victim," Perseus protested. "She did nothing wrong." "She was the means by which my temple was defiled," Athena said coldly. "Innocent or not, her presence in my service became intolerable after that violation. I gave her power, transformed her into something that could never be touched again, never be violated. It was a gift as much as a curse. A gift." Perseus could not keep the bitterness from his voice. "She lived in isolation and misery for years. She killed everyone who looked at her. She begged me to end her life. What kind of gift is that?" "The gift of never being weak again," Athena said. "The gift of being feared rather than desired. Many women would choose such power if offered. She did not choose it," Perseus said quietly. "That's the point. She never chose any of it." Athena's expression hardened. "You forget yourself, Perseus. You are mortal. You do not question the wisdom of the gods." Perseus bowed his head, knowing he had pushed as far as he dared. "I apologize, my lady. I spoke out of turn." But inside, his anger burned. He had killed an innocent woman, cursed by divine injustice, and now her head would serve the very goddess who had destroyed her life. It was wrong. All of it was wrong. Athena dismissed him and Perseus left the temple. He never returned to Athens again. He went back to Seriphos, married Andromeda, and tried to build a quiet life. He returned the divine gifts, the winged sandals, to Hermes, the helm of darkness to Hades through the gods' intermediaries. He kept only simple mortal weapons, wanting no more reminders of the gods and their cruel games. But he could not escape his legend. Word of his deeds spread: the slaying of Medusa, the rescue of Andromeda, the death of Polydectes. He became known as Perseus the hero, Perseus the monster slayer, Perseus the god-born. People celebrated him. They told stories of his courage and his victory over the terrible Gorgon. They painted him on pottery, carved his image in stone, sang songs of his greatness. But Perseus never felt like a hero. He felt like a killer, an executioner, a tool used by the gods for their own purposes. He tried to tell Medusa's story true as he had promised her. He told people that she had been a victim, that she had been cursed unjustly, that she had suffered more than anyone deserved. Some listened, most did not. Heroes needed monsters to slay, and stories needed villains. It was easier to make Medusa a creature of pure evil than to confront the uncomfortable truth that sometimes monsters are made by the very gods we worship. Years passed. Perseus and Andromeda had children, built a life together. He was never fully happy. The weight of what he had done never quite left him, but he found contentment of a sort. And throughout those years in Athens, Athena wore the aegis with Medusa's head mounted upon it. The goddess went to war, and Medusa's petrifying gaze turned enemies to stone. The goddess walked among mortals, and people averted their eyes from the terrible face on her shield. Even in death, Medusa served. Even severed from her body, her curse continued. She had wanted rest, had welcomed death as release, but even that was denied her. Her head would remain on Athena's shield for eternity, a trophy and a warning, power incarnate. And her story would be told and retold, changing with each telling. Sometimes she was a monster from birth, evil and terrible. Sometimes she was a victim transformed by divine wrath. Sometimes she was something in between. But always, always, she was Medusa. The woman with serpents for hair, the creature whose gaze turned flesh to stone, the cautionary tale, the warning, the monster. That was her legacy. That was what remained after all the suffering, all the injustice, all the tragedy. A name that would live forever, even if the truth of her story was forgotten. And so we come to the end of Medusa's story. Or perhaps not the end, for stories like this never truly end. They echo through time, changing shape, taking on new meanings with each generation that tells them. But before we let sleep take us, before we drift away into our own dreams, let us pause and consider what this ancient tale really means. What truth lies beneath the horror? What lesson, if any, can we draw from this tragedy? Medusa's story is at its heart a story about injustice. She was a woman who did everything right. She was devoted to her goddess, faithful to her vows, pure in intention and action. She sought sanctuary in a sacred space, believing that piety and devotion would protect her, but they did not. When violence came for her, when a god decided to take what he wanted regardless of her will, she discovered that all her prayers, all her righteousness, all her dedication meant nothing. The gods who should have protected her either could not or would not intervene. And then, and this is perhaps the cruelest part, she was punished for being victimized. Not the perpetrator, but the victim. She bore the curse, the transformation, the isolation. She became the monster, while Poseidon faced no consequences at all. This is not justice. This has never been justice, but it reflects a truth about the world, about power and powerlessness, about who gets punished and who escapes blame, about how victims are so often made to carry the weight of crimes committed against them. Medusa's transformation into a Gorgon can be read in many ways. On the surface, it seems purely punitive, a cruel goddess lashing out at the nearest target because she cannot strike the one truly responsible. But there is another way to understand it. Though whether it offers comfort is uncertain, Athena gave Medusa power. Terrible power, yes, isolating power. But power nonetheless, after being violated, after being made helpless before a god's desire, Medusa was transformed into someone who could never be approached, never be touched, never be victimized again. Anyone who looked at her with desire, with aggression, with any intention at all, they would die. They would turn to stone. Is that a curse? Or is it in some twisted way a kind of protection? Perhaps both. Perhaps the cruelest gift imaginable. Safety purchased at the cost of everything else. The ability to defend oneself by destroying all connection, all possibility of relationship, all chance of love or companionship. Medusa became untouchable. But what is the value of safety if it comes with absolute isolation? What is the point of power if it prevents you from ever being truly seen, truly known, truly human? She was frozen between two states, no longer fully mortal, never quite divine. Neither living nor dead, a creature of terrible power and profound helplessness. And this too reflects something true about trauma, about how violation can trap you in a space between who you were and who you might have been, how it can make you dangerous to approach, even to those who might wish you well. How it can isolate you behind walls of your own making and others' fear. The serpents in her hair, those writhing, venomous extensions of herself. They are anger made visible. They are the rage of the violated, the fury of the unjustly punished given physical form. They strike at everything that comes near, making no distinction between threat and friend. Because when you have been betrayed so profoundly, how can you trust anything ever again? Medusa's gaze, which turned flesh to stone, represents another kind of power. The power to stop, to freeze, to preserve forever. Those who looked upon her were trapped in that moment of seeing, unable to move forward or back, locked in eternal stasis. Is that not what trauma does? Does it not freeze us in the moment of our wounding, making it difficult to move forward, to grow, to change? We become like those statues, caught forever in the instant when everything changed, unable to escape that frozen moment. And yet, despite everything, despite the curse and the isolation and the killing gaze, Medusa tried to maintain her humanity. She lived with her sisters. She kept a home, however crude. She tried to weave beauty on her loom, to arrange flowers, to create some small comfort in her exile. Even transformed into a monster, some part of her clung to the woman she had been. This is perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of her story, that she did not become a mindless beast, did not lose herself entirely to the curse. She remained aware, remained conscious of what she had lost, remained capable of suffering. When Perseus came to kill her, she did not rage or fight. She asked him for mercy. She asked him to end her suffering quickly. She had lived as a monster long enough. She was ready for it to be over. Think about what that means. Think about the depth of despair required to welcome death at the hands of a stranger. To see the hero with his blade and feel not fear but relief. Medusa's death was framed as a victory, a hero's triumph over a monster, a quest completed, glory earned. Perseus became famous for killing her. He was celebrated, honored, remembered as great. But was it truly heroic? To kill a sleeping woman who had already suffered more than anyone should have to endure? To end a life that had become unbearable, not through any evil of her own but through divine cruelty? Or was it simply sad? A mercy killing perhaps, but hardly glorious. The ending of a tragedy, not the climax of a hero's tale. And even in death, Medusa was not free. Her head, severed from her body, retained its power. It was used as a weapon, turned against others, mounted on Athena's shield, to serve the goddess who had cursed her in the first place. She could not rest. Even in death, she was useful, powerful, dangerous. Even in death, she was not allowed to simply stop. Her image became an apotropaic symbol, a ward against evil, placed on shields and temples and doorways to frighten away malicious forces. The face of the monster became protection, her horror transformed into a guardian. There is irony in that. The woman who could not be protected became, in death, a symbol of protection. The victim became the guardian. The one who suffered became the one invoked to prevent suffering. But it also reveals something important. Even in ancient times, even among those who told her story as a tale of monsters and heroes, there was an understanding that Medusa's power could be used for good. That her fearsome aspect could defend, could protect, could ward away harm. Over the centuries, Medusa's image evolved. She appeared on coins and amulets, on armor and architecture. She became one of the most recognizable figures from Greek mythology. Her face instantly identifiable, even to those who knew nothing of her story. And in modern times, her story has been reclaimed, reinterpreted, understood anew. Feminist scholars and artists have recognized in Medusa a powerful symbol of feminine rage, of the anger that comes from being victimized, from being punished for existing in a female body, from being seen as object rather than person. Her serpentine hair, once a mark of monstrosity, has been reimagined as a crown of power. Her deadly gaze, once a curse to be feared, has been reframed as the ability to stop those who would harm her, to literally petrify those who would objectify or assault. In this reading, Medusa is not the monster, but the wronged woman whose anger is justified, whose rage is righteous, whose power, however terrible, is her own. She has become a symbol for survivors of sexual violence, for those who have been blamed for their own victimization, for anyone who has been transformed by trauma into something society deems monstrous. Her story resonates because it touches on something universal and tragic: the way innocence is punished, the way victims are blamed, the way power protects itself by sacrificing the powerless. But perhaps most powerfully, Medusa's story is about transformation, about how we are changed by what happens to us, how trauma reshapes us, how we can become unrecognizable even to ourselves. She was a priestess, and she became a monster. She was beautiful, and she became hideous. She was devoted, and she became cursed. But through it all, she remained Medusa. Changed, yes. Transformed, certainly. But still herself. Still carrying within her the memory of who she had been. Still capable of suffering and hope, and the desire for peace. Her story asks us to consider, what makes someone a monster? Is it their appearance, their power, their capacity to harm, or is monstrosity something else? A label we apply to those we wish to destroy, a justification for violence against those we fear or misunderstand. Medusa killed, yes, but she killed because she had no choice, because looking at her meant death, because her very existence had been weaponized by divine curse. The true monsters in her story: Poseidon, who violated her; Athena, who punished the victim; Polydectes, who tried to force himself on Perseus's mother. They faced no consequences, or only incidental ones. The woman who suffered most was labeled the monster. The woman who never chose violence became its symbol. That reversal, that fundamental injustice, is at the heart of why Medusa's story continues to matter, continues to be told, continues to resonate across millennia. Because in every age, in every society, there are Medusas, people, usually women, who are victimized and then blamed for their own victimization, who are transformed by trauma and then rejected for being transformed, who are made dangerous by the violence done to them and then called monsters for it. And in every age, we must ask ourselves, are we seeing clearly? Are we recognizing victims for who they are? Or are we like the ancient Greeks, more comfortable with simple stories of heroes and monsters than with the complicated truth of injustice and suffering? A long contemplative pause in the music, so let us remember Medusa truly, not as a simple monster to be slain, not as a cautionary tale about beauty or pride, not even as a symbol of rage or victimhood alone, but as a whole person, a woman who tried to live righteously, who suffered unjustly, who was transformed against her will, who endured isolation and grief, who killed because she had no choice, and who ultimately welcomed death as release from an unbearable existence. She was Medusa. She was mortal. She was cursed. She was victim and monster, powerful and helpless, dead and eternal. And her story, tragic, unjust, painful, remains with us because it touches something true about the world we live in, about power and powerlessness, about who gets to be called hero and who gets called monster. May we remember her not as Athena wished, as a trophy, a weapon, a face on a shield, but as she was, a woman who tried to be good, who suffered more than anyone should, and who deserves at last to rest. And so, dear listeners, we come to the end of our journey through Medusa's story, a tale of beauty and horror, of injustice and power, of transformation and tragedy. As you drift towards sleep, perhaps you will dream of ancient temples and rocky shores, of serpents and stone, of a woman who wanted only peace and was given only pain. Perhaps you will dream of heroes and monsters, and wonder which is which. Or perhaps you will simply rest, letting the story settle into that space where all myths live. Not quite real, not quite fiction, but something in between, something true in the way that matters most. Sleep well, dear listeners. May your dreams be kinder than the fates that shaped Medusa's life. May you wake remembering that every monster has a story, and every story deserves to be told truly. This has been Mythic Night, the story of Medusa, the cursed and the monster, the victim and the legend, the woman who was, and the symbol she became. Until next time, rest well.